Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had been relentless. Its constant rhythm against the canopy of trees created an eerie symphony that seemed to follow the lone traveler as they made their way through the dense forest. The path, once clear, had become a muddy trail, indistinct and slipping beneath the weight of the storm. Elias had been walking for hours, the shadows growing longer as the sun sank behind a thick blanket of clouds. He had lost track of time, the sky now an endless shade of gray. It had been days since he had set out on his journey, drawn to this place by a letter, a map, and an invitation. The letter was unsigned, just a symbol of an ancient oak carved into the wax seal, and a simple message: come to the lodge at the edge of the world. At first, Elias thought it was a joke, but curiosity gnawed at him. The map had led him deeper into the forest than he had ever been before, far beyond the reach of any known trail. But then, just as the wind began to pick up, he saw it, a clearing ahead, dimly lit by flickering firelight. The lodge appeared through the mist, an old structure of dark wood and stone, half hidden by the twisting vines of the forest. Its windows were dark, but the faint glow from inside beckoned him, a silent invitation. Elias hesitated for a moment, the weight of the forest pressing on him. He wasn't sure why he felt this sense of dread, as if the trees themselves were watching him. But he had come this far. He pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly in protest. The interior was shadowed, the low fire casting long, flickering shapes on the walls. The scent of something old, dust, wood, and something else, something faintly metallic, lingered in the air. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he stepped inside, feeling the chill of the lodge seep into his bones. A voice, soft and cracked, called out from the shadows. "Welcome." Elias froze at the sound of the voice. It had come from the far side of the room, near the hearth where the fire flickered. For a moment, he wondered if it had been his imagination playing tricks on him in the oppressive quiet of the forest. But no, there it was again, a soft, almost raspy voice, as if someone had been waiting for him. "Come closer," the voice urged, a slight tremor in its tone. It wasn't threatening, but there was something unsettling about it, something wrong. Slowly, Elias took a step forward, his boots echoing softly on the wooden floor. The firelight danced, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. As he approached, the figure in the corner came into view. An old man sat in a high-backed chair, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. His face was pale, with deep lines marking his features. His eyes, though clouded with age, still had an unsettling sharpness to them. He looked like he had been here for centuries, his body still yet his soul tethered to something much older, something darker. The fire crackled, casting an orange glow across the room, but it didn't warm the coldness that seeped into Elias's skin. The man smiled, revealing yellow teeth, and gestured toward a nearby chair. "Sit," he croaked. "We've been waiting for you." Elias hesitated, a shiver crawling up his spine. He didn't trust the invitation, didn't trust the strange atmosphere of the lodge, but the exhaustion in his limbs pushed him toward the chair. The fire beckoned, promising warmth, and his weary body ached for a moment of rest. As he sat down, the old man didn't speak right away. His eyes drifted toward the fire, and Elias followed his gaze. The flames seemed to dance in patterns that felt wrong, like they were moving with a mind of their own. The air around the hearth was thick, and the shadows clung to the corners of the room. "You don't belong here," the man said suddenly, his voice a rasp that made Elias's blood run cold. "But you've come anyway. You've crossed the threshold just as they said you would." Elias's heart began to race. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. "They said you would come?" Who was he talking about? Was this some kind of trap? "I'm not sure I understand," Elias replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man chuckled, a low sound that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. "No one ever does. Not at first, anyway. But you'll learn soon enough in time. This lodge is not just a building, boy. It's a door. A door to things that sleep in the forest, things that never wake. But sometimes they want to, and when they do, they need a guide. Someone like you." Elias's stomach churned. The room suddenly felt smaller, as though the walls were pressing in on him. He tried to stand, but his legs were like jelly, and the world spun around him. The firelight flickered violently, and the shadows stretched long and twisted, crawling across the walls. What do you mean? A guide to what?" Elias's voice cracked, betraying his fear. The old man's smile widened, stretching unnaturally. "A guide to them, to the forgotten ones. The forest has always been their home. It watches, waits, and when the time comes, it reaches out. But the forest doesn't give freely. No, it asks for something in return. A life, a soul, something precious. Elias could barely breathe now. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a frantic drum in his ears. The old man's eyes gleamed with something darker, something ancient as he leaned forward. They'll come for you, Elias. The moment you crossed the boundary of the forest, you became a part of their story. You're not just here for shelter, not just a lost traveler. You're the one they've been waiting for. They'll find you. And when they do... The old man leaned back, his voice dropping to a mere whisper. You'll have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice. The fire crackled louder, its light flickering in and out, casting long, strange shadows across the walls. For a moment, Elias thought he saw shapes moving in the dark corners of the lodge, twisting and shifting, but when he blinked, they were gone. The old man's gaze didn't waver, and Elias felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over him. The lodge, which once seemed like a refuge, now felt like a tomb, a prison built by time and secrets. And it wasn't just the firelight that was flickering now. The very air seemed to pulse with something dark, something hidden, something alive. Elias opened his mouth to speak, to ask more questions, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he turned his eyes to the door that had been open when he entered. But now it seemed different. The forest outside was no longer just rain and trees. It was alive, its darkness creeping closer, the trees bending toward the lodge as if reaching for him. Don't worry, Elias, the old man said, his voice like a soft wind, barely more than a breath. The night is young. Elias's heart hammered in his chest as the old man's words sank deeper into his mind, clawing at his sanity. His eyes flicked nervously toward the door, then back to the man in the chair, who seemed so oddly calm in the face of such madness. It was as if the horror of the situation had already been accepted, as though this was simply the way things were meant to be. The fire flickered wildly, casting strange, sharp shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Elias could almost hear whispers, low, inaudible sounds, like voices speaking from within the walls. He clenched his fists, trying to steady himself, but the terror wrapped around him like a tightening noose. Who are they? Elias forced the words out through his trembling lips, his voice raw. What do you mean they've been waiting for me? Why me? The old man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, unreadable expression. He looked at Elias for a long moment as though weighing his response. Then, slowly, he shifted in his chair, the creaking of the old wood filling the silence between them. They are the ones who have always been here, the old man said, his voice low and almost reverent. The ones who live beneath the roots of the trees within the shadows of the forest. You may have heard stories, tales of creatures that stalk the night, of things that only come out when the moon is high and the mist rises. But the truth is far darker than any story. Elias leaned forward, despite his fear, despite the overwhelming desire to run. There was something in the man's voice, something hypnotic about the way he spoke. It was like the old man was pulling him into a deeper reality, one where nothing made sense and everything was possible. The forest itself is alive, boy, the man continued, his voice now a rasping whisper. But it's not the kind of life you know. It's older than anything you can imagine. The trees aren't just wood and bark. They are vessels holding something ancient within them. And the lodge? He paused, his eyes narrowing. The lodge is more than just a shelter. It's a focus, a place where the boundaries between worlds are thin. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. His eyes darted to the door again, then to the window where the rain still poured relentlessly, like a river of dark silver. The storm outside seemed to be growing fiercer, the wind howling like a living thing. It was as if the entire forest had come alive, its breath pressing against the lodge, seeking entry. Do you understand now, boy? The old man asked, his voice full of an unsettling calmness. You've been drawn here for a reason. The forest calls to you just as it has called to others before you. You've crossed into its domain and now it won't let you go. You are its guest, its offering. And when the time comes, you will serve its will. A cold shiver ran down Elias's spine. He wanted to stand, to flee, but his body felt like it was rooted to the floor. The room seemed to be closing in on him, the shadows lengthening and twisting, curling around the furniture like dark tendrils. He glanced at the window once more, and for a brief, fleeting moment, he thought he saw something. Someone, standing just outside, silhouetted against the storm. He blinked, and when he looked again, the figure was gone. What does the forest want from me? Elias finally managed to ask, his voice shaking. What does it need? The old man's eyes gleamed in the firelight, his smile returning, though it was no longer comforting. That, he said, is the question that no one can truly answer. Some say the forest wants blood, others say it craves souls. But the truth is it doesn't need anything. It simply takes. It takes whatever it can get, whenever it can. Elias felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. His chest tightened, and the room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with dread. The fire crackled louder, but Elias felt no warmth from it. The old man's voice, though calm, grew darker with each word. The forest has existed long before any of us, he continued, and it will exist long after we're gone. It doesn't care about our lives or our deaths, but it knows us. It knows our deepest fears, our darkest desires. It feeds on them. And when it is hungry, it will take whatever it pleases. Sometimes it's a soul. Other times, it's something far more precious. Elias recoiled, his mind racing. He needed to leave, to escape, but something was holding him in place. The lodge, the shadows, the fire, it all felt like a trap closing in on him. I don't want any part of this, Elias said, standing up suddenly, his voice rising. I'm not your offering. I'm leaving. The old man's laugh echoed through the room, a low, cracked sound that sent another shiver through Elias's spine. You don't have a choice, boy, the man said, his voice now sharp and commanding. You came here willingly, and now you are part of the forest. The trees have already marked you. The wind has whispered your name. The shadows have already claimed you. The room seemed to darken even further, as though the very air had thickened with malice. Elias's breath quickened, panic creeping into his chest. His legs wobbled beneath him, and he could feel the weight of something pressing on his shoulders, dragging him down. Listen to the trees, the old man said softly, almost a chant. They are calling for you. It is too late to run. You are here, and you belong to them now. Elias stumbled backward, his eyes wide with fear, his heart racing in his chest. The shadows around him seemed to shift and grow, creeping along the walls, stretching toward him like dark hands. The wind outside howled louder, and the rain battered the windows with increasing force. And then, in the distance, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the lodge, the sound of something awakening. Something that had been waiting for far longer than Elias could ever have known. Elias's mind raced as the old man's words echoed in his ears. You belong to them now. He could feel the weight of those words settle on his chest, suffocating him as if the lodge itself was pressing in from all sides. The fire crackled louder, the flames now twisting and writhing in unnatural patterns, casting elongated, grotesque shadows that seemed to leap and dance across the room. The temperature dropped even further, and Elias's breath came out in visible puffs, his skin prickling with cold. The air in the lodge felt thicker now, more oppressive, as if it had become saturated with something ancient and dark. The shadows in the corners of the room no longer merely stretched. They moved, slow and deliberate, like dark tendrils creeping across the wooden walls. Elias could hear the faintest whispers, carried on the wind that howled outside the windows. They were too soft to understand, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, hungry, and foreboding. A deep rumble echoed from beyond the lodge, far off at first, but growing closer, like thunder in the distance. The walls vibrated faintly, and Elias instinctively pressed his hands to his ears, but it did nothing to block the sound. It was as though the very ground beneath him was beginning to stir, alive with something deep and primal, something that had been dormant for centuries. Elias took a tentative step back, his footfalls hollow in the heavy silence. His body screamed at him to run, to leave this place before whatever it was that lived in the forest could find him. But his legs refused to move, as though an invisible force was keeping him anchored to the spot. His gaze darted back to the old man, who had not moved, his eyes still fixed on Elias with that unnerving calmness. The man's lips twitched into a smile that seemed more knowing than comforting. The forest never lets go, the old man whispered, his voice rasping like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. Once it has you, it will never release you. The trees have chosen you, Elias. You've crossed the threshold, and there's no going back. Elias's throat tightened, and he swallowed hard, but the lump in his throat refused to budge. He had to escape. His eyes shot to the door once more, but it was no longer the simple wooden entrance he had walked through. The edges of the door frame had blurred, blending with the darkened walls. It was as though the lodge itself had swallowed the doorway, sealing him in. Suddenly, a low, bone-chilling howl broke through the cacophony of wind and rain. Elias froze, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the cry of an animal, nor the wind howling through the trees. It was something far worse, something alive, something that had been waiting. The howl sent a wave of dread crashing over him, and he stumbled back, his heart racing in his chest. The old man's smile widened at the sound, and he tilted his head as if listening to the same noise. "The forest calls for you," he said softly, almost reverently. "It's hungry. It needs you to guide it, to show it the way. It doesn't care who you are or what you've done. It only cares about the sacrifice." Elias shook his head desperately. "I don't understand. What sacrifice? What do you want from me?" The old man's gaze grew darker, the light from the fire casting strange, twisted reflections in his eyes. His smile faded, replaced with something more sinister, more predatory. "The forest does not ask. It takes. And once it has its grip on you, it feeds until it is sated." The man's voice dropped to a whisper, his words curling around Elias like a trap. "But it is never truly sated. It always wants more." A tremor passed through Elias's body, and he instinctively took another step back, his shoes sliding on the wooden floor. It was then that he realized that the shadows around him were not just shapes. No, they were alive. They swirled and shifted, their forms becoming more distinct, like dark silhouettes creeping along the walls. There were faces now, twisted and contorted, their features flickering in and out of existence, appearing for the briefest moment before disappearing into the darkness. The whispers grew louder. They were no longer just faint murmurs. They were distinct now, pulling at his mind, making his thoughts scatter and spin. He couldn't understand the words, but the urgency was unmistakable. The forest was speaking to him, and it was growing impatient. The rumbling outside grew louder, accompanied by the crashing sound of branches snapping in the wind. The earth itself seemed to groan, as if the very roots of the trees were stirring beneath him. Something massive was moving through the forest, something ancient, something that had lain dormant for centuries, but now it was waking. "No," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "No, I can't stay here. I can't be a part of this." He turned toward the door again, but his vision blurred as his surroundings seemed to distort. The walls stretched, the shadows grew deeper, and the very air seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. He felt something cold and heavy press against him, as if the lodge itself was trying to hold him in place. And then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. They were slow, deliberate, echoing through the silence like a predator closing in. Elias spun around, heart in his throat, but there was nothing there. Just the old man, sitting motionless in his chair, watching him with that same unnerving calmness. "You can't run from what's coming," the old man said softly. "It has already found you. The forest is awake, and it will not rest until it has claimed you." Elias's eyes darted around the room, his mind racing for an escape. But the door was gone now, there was no exit. The only thing left was the fire, burning with a fierce intensity, the shadows swirling around it like hungry spirits. And then, through the distorted air, Elias saw it, a figure standing in the doorway. At first it was just a shape, tall and thin, but as the figure stepped into the firelight, Elias's blood ran cold. It was a woman. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, and her hair hung in wild tangles around her face. Her eyes were black, empty voids, staring straight at him. And in her hands she held something twisted and dark. The air grew heavy as she moved closer, her footsteps silent on the floor. Elias's body locked in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. She smiled, a grin that didn't reach her eyes, and for the briefest moment, Elias could see something behind her. A massive shadow looming just outside the door, its form indistinct but enormous, as though the forest itself had come alive. And then the woman spoke, her voice a rasping whisper, barely audible over the howling wind. "Welcome home." Elias's heart pounded so fiercely it felt as though it might burst from his chest. The woman's smile, cold and merciless, twisted in the firelight, her black eyes reflecting nothing but an abyss. Her presence was overpowering, as if she were a part of the very night itself, an extension of the darkness that had descended upon the lodge. The air grew even colder, and Elias could see his breath hanging in the air like a fog of dread. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs refused to move. His body, locked in place by some unseen force, could only watch as she stepped closer, the faint echo of her footsteps whispering through the room like an omen. The shadows, now more alive than ever, seemed to stretch toward her, their forms writhing and twisting in unnatural shapes. Her grin widened, and the woman raised one hand, slender fingers stretched toward Elias. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost teasing, as if she were savoring the moment. But it wasn't just her hand that moved, everything around him seemed to shift. The shadows on the walls melted together, merging into something larger, darker, the shape of a great beast forming just beyond the firelight. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin orbs of red that pierced the dimness. Elias felt a tightening in his chest, an invisible weight pressing on him. The woman's eyes never left him, her gaze pulling him into a trance-like state, suffocating him. The old man had said the forest had already claimed him. He thought it was just madness, just the ramblings of a lunatic. But now Elias realized he had been wrong. The woman's voice came again, like a soft whisper carried on the wind, but this time the words were unmistakable. "You are ours now." Her fingers, cold and pale, brushed against his skin, and the touch felt like ice. The room spun, the edges of his vision darkening, and for a moment, Elias could not tell if he was still in the lodge or if he had been pulled into another world entirely. The fire flickered violently, casting wild, grotesque shadows against the walls. It was as if the very flames were alive, their tongues lashing out toward him, hungry. "Leave him be." Elias managed to force the words out through clenched teeth, his voice thick with panic. His legs trembled beneath him, but still they refused to move. The woman's grin deepened, her lips pulling back in a slow, mocking smile. "You cannot fight what already lives in your veins." With that, she took another step forward, and Elias could feel the ground beneath him shift. He looked down, his vision blurring, and saw roots, thick, gnarled, and dark, rising from the floor, winding their way around his legs, pulling him down as though the very earth had come alive to claim him. The old man's voice, calm and measured, rose above the sound of Elias's racing heartbeat. "Do you understand now?" he croaked. "The forest was never just a place. It is alive. It has always been alive. The trees, the soil, the stones, it's all one, and it has been waiting. Waiting for someone to cross the threshold. Waiting for the one it would claim." Elias gasped, struggling against the roots that had now wound themselves up his body, creeping up his arms, his neck. Panic surged through him, but the more he fought, the tighter the grip of the forest became. The woman stepped closer, her black eyes gleaming with an unnatural hunger. "You have already crossed into its heart," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "You are part of the forest now. You are part of its story. And its story is endless." The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The shadows on the walls merged into one massive shape, growing ever larger, ever darker. The air thickened, suffocating him, making it difficult to breathe. The whispers, once faint, grew louder, a chorus of voices now echoing from all directions, filling his ears, curling around his thoughts. They were speaking to him. "We are the forest. We are the silence between the stars. We are the shadows in the trees. And now, you are us." The weight of their words pressed on him, making his head spin. He could feel himself slipping, falling into something vast and ancient, something that was beyond time and space. It was as though the very essence of the forest had wrapped itself around him, binding him to it. He wasn't just inside the lodge anymore, he was inside the heart of the forest itself, part of something that existed long before the world as he knew it. "No," Elias whispered, the word barely escaping his lips as the roots continued their relentless pull. "I don't belong here." The woman knelt in front of him, her face inches from his. Her smile was now a twisted, mocking thing, full of hunger and malice. "You always belonged here, Elias," she purred. "You just didn't know it yet." With a flick of her wrist, the roots binding him shifted, tightening further around him, and Elias felt the air leave his lungs, his heart beating erratically. He was drowning in the grip of the forest. But then, just as quickly, the pressure lifted, just enough for him to breathe, just enough for him to feel the cold, biting air fill his lungs. His body trembled with the effort to stay conscious, to stay grounded in this reality, but it was slipping away, unraveling before his eyes. The old man spoke again, his voice softer now, almost tender. "The forest doesn't just take from you. It becomes you. You are part of it now. You carry its memories, its whispers. And soon you will be just like the others." The others. Elias's mind flashed to the shadows he had seen earlier, the faces that flickered and twisted in and out of existence. Others who had been claimed. The woman stood, her expression changing from malice to something far colder. She turned to the old man, nodding in agreement, as if some unspoken understanding passed between them. "It's time," she said, her voice like a rustling of dry leaves. "He will join us now." With that, she extended her hand to Elias, and the shadows around him seemed to respond, shifting and swirling toward her, growing more intense, more oppressive. For a moment, Elias closed his eyes, the weight of the situation pressing on him like a vice. He thought of the world beyond the forest, the world he had left behind, and the life he had once known. But it was slipping away, fading like a distant memory, as if the forest was erasing him, pulling him into its endless depths. And then, as the shadows closed in around him, he felt something shift inside him. A small, insistent voice in the back of his mind whispered, a glimmer of defiance. Not yet. With a surge of strength he didn't know he had left, Elias threw his arm out, knocking the woman's hand aside. His fingers scraped against the rough bark of the roots, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw something. Someone, standing in the doorway of the lodge, silhouetted against the storm. It was a figure, tall and cloaked, and in that instant, Elias felt a fleeting sense of hope. The figure stood still, unmoving, but its presence was enough to break the hold on him, just enough to make the roots loosen their grip. And then, just as quickly, the figure disappeared as if it had never been there at all. Elias's chest heaved as the roots loosened their hold, the pressure on his lungs easing, but the world around him still swirled with the oppressive darkness. His eyes darted to the doorway, where the figure had appeared for that brief moment. Was it real? Had he imagined it in his desperation? The storm outside continued to batter the windows, but now there was something else. A pulse in the air, a shift in the atmosphere as if the lodge itself were waiting, watching, holding its breath. The woman had stepped back, her eyes narrowing with an expression of dark amusement, as though she were both disappointed and intrigued. Her fingers twitched as if she were tempted to reach for him again, but something in her demeanor had changed. The shadows that clung to the walls seemed to tremble with anticipation, as though the very room was alive, waiting for a signal. You fight it, she murmured, her voice a strange blend of curiosity and amusement. You think you can escape, but the forest, it never lets go. You can't run from what's inside you, Elias. The old man, who had remained eerily silent until now, shifted in his chair, his voice creaking through the room like the groan of an ancient tree. Don't be foolish, boy. You were chosen long ago. The forest doesn't make mistakes. It knew you before you even stepped foot in it. Elias shook his head, trying to clear the fog of panic that clung to his mind. His pulse raced in his ears, the blood pounding through his veins like a drum. He could still feel the tendrils of darkness reaching for him, the shadows pulling at his consciousness, but the figure at the door, the figure, had given him a spark of hope. For a moment, the idea of escape had seemed impossible, but now he wasn't so sure. Someone had stood there, and they had been waiting for him. His gaze shifted back to the woman. Her smile had faded, replaced by a strange, calculating look. She wasn't the one in control anymore. There was something else, something more dangerous, lurking behind her eyes. Why? Elias rasped, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. Why me? Why the forest? What is it you want? The woman's smile returned, but it was darker now, more twisted. You are a part of the forest now, Elias, she said, her words slow and deliberate. And the forest, it is not like anything you have ever known. It is not bound by time, by place, by mortal understanding. It remembers those who have come before you. And it will never forget you. Elias's skin crawled at her words. He had heard the stories of forests that seemed alive, ancient, magical places where time twisted and creatures beyond imagination dwelt, but he had never believed them. Not truly. But now, standing in this cursed lodge, with the weight of the forest pressing down on him, he was beginning to understand. The woman stepped forward again, her presence growing more overwhelming with every movement. The shadows in the room thickened, swirling like dark smoke, crawling up the walls and twisting around the old man's chair. Elias could feel the temperature drop even further, and the air became heavy with a sense of inevitability. The storm outside had intensified, its fury now hammering against the lodge as if nature itself was reacting to the forces at play inside. The woman's voice lowered, becoming almost a whisper as she continued. The forest remembers all those who cross its path. It claims them, breaks them, and then makes them part of itself. It feeds on fear, on hope, on memories. And when it has had enough, it takes what it needs, your soul, your essence, your very being. Elias's heart clenched painfully in his chest. He could feel the edges of his mind fraying, the weight of her words dragging him down, but something within him refused to give in. He could feel that same spark, the figure in the doorway, the fleeting hope that refused to die. He didn't know what it meant, but he wouldn't give in to the darkness. Then why did it show me that figure? Elias demanded, his voice growing stronger. He stood tall, fighting the urge to collapse under the weight of the forest's influence. Why did it help me? For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the woman's face. She paused, her dark eyes narrowing as if considering his question for the first time. She had expected him to break, to fall under the forest's sway, but instead, Elias was fighting back, even if it was just a small flicker of resistance. Help you. Her voice was tinged with disdain, as though the very idea of aid was beneath her. It didn't help you. Was the forest. The same force that calls to you, that seeks to claim you. You're not the first to hear it. Others have come before you, drawn by the same call. Some of them thought they could fight it just as you do now. Elias's mind raced. The figure. The one who had stood at the door. Had they been someone like him? Someone who had tried to escape the pull of the forest and failed? Or was this something else altogether? His thoughts were tangled, but there was one thing that remained clear. He couldn't trust the woman. He couldn't trust the old man or the lodge, or the forest that seemed to be alive, watching, waiting. The rumble of the storm outside grew louder, now almost deafening, shaking the windows and rattling the walls. It felt as though the forest was preparing for something, an awakening, a beginning, something awful. I'll never belong to this place, Elias spat, though the words felt hollow even as they left his mouth. He was uncertain now, unsure of what to do or where to go. But there was still a flicker of defiance, a stubborn thread in him that refused to break. I will never be part of it. The woman's smile twisted into something far colder. She raised her hand, and the shadows in the room surged forward, swirling around Elias, threatening to engulf him. The room darkened further, the fire burning lower, the air thickening until he could hardly breathe. You are already a part of it, Elias, she whispered, her voice like the wind rustling through dead leaves. You cannot outrun what is in your blood. The forest has chosen you. And now the only question remains. She paused, her eyes glinting in the dark. How long will you last before you surrender? Elias felt the pressure of the forest's grip tightening again, but this time, something deep inside him snapped. The flicker of hope, the figure at the door, the faint sense of something else, was still there, still waiting. He wasn't going to surrender. He wasn't going to let the darkness win. The lodge, the shadows, the forest itself, they would not claim him. And with that thought, Elias braced himself for whatever was to come next. The air around Elias grew thick, suffocating as the shadows pressed in, swirling like a storm of darkness. He could feel them, cold tendrils wrapping around his limbs, his chest, pulling at his mind, his very essence. The fire in the hearth had almost completely died down now, leaving only the faintest glow, casting eerie, flickering light across the room. But it was not the fire that held his attention. It was the woman. The cold, calculating smile on her face. The way the shadows followed her like a living, breathing extension of herself. Her eyes were fixed on him, gleaming with a cruel amusement, as though she were watching a weak animal struggle against an inescapable trap. You still don't understand, do you, Elias? She said softly, her voice like a caress, yet laced with something dark. The forest is you. The moment you crossed its threshold, you became a part of its story. And that story doesn't end with you leaving. It doesn't end at all. Elias's body trembled, but his mind screamed with defiance. The shadows seemed to pull at him with an almost magnetic force, their cold presence sliding over his skin, wrapping around his mind like chains. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat, his body yearning to fight, to flee, but his legs felt as though they were cemented to the ground. The woman tilted her head, observing him as if he were a child trying to understand something far beyond his grasp. Do you feel it? She asked, her voice almost playful now. The forest's hunger? Its yearning for your essence? It's inside you now, Elias. The darkness is a part of your soul. Elias felt his thoughts blur. The whispers were louder now, filling the room with the voices of the forest. They weren't just words, they were feelings. Emotions of loss, despair, rage, and something more. Something ancient. He could feel his own thoughts slipping away, overwhelmed by the overwhelming weight of the forest's presence. It was in him. It was dragging him deeper, sinking into his veins, mixing with his blood. The woman stepped forward, her feet silent on the floor, her form a shadow among shadows. It doesn't matter how hard you fight. It doesn't matter how strong your will is. The forest is patient. It waits for the right moment, and when it comes, you will be consumed. His mind flashed to the figure in the doorway. The fleeting hope he had felt. Was it real? Was someone else in the lodge trying to reach him? Or was it just his mind, grasping at a thin thread of sanity, trying to keep him grounded in reality? Suddenly there was a loud bang, the sound of the door slamming shut. Elias jerked his head toward the entrance, his heart lurching in his chest. The door had been open before, but now it was shut, the heavy wooden door bearing him in. The darkness outside had swallowed any trace of the storm, and the forest beyond seemed even more alive, a chaotic, seething presence. The woman turned her head toward the door as well, a flicker of interest crossing her face. Her smile widened as if she had been waiting for something, waiting for the final shift. "Ah," she murmured, "so it's finally arrived." Elias strained against the grip of the shadows, trying to make sense of the situation. What was coming? What did she mean? Was there someone else here? Was it the figure, the one who had appeared even if only for a moment? And then the shadows in the room shifted again. Slowly at first, creeping across the floor, stretching toward the door. Elias could feel the presence grow, an overwhelming sense of something far older, far darker, moving through the lodge. His body burned with fear, his skin crawling as the shadows thickened. Then, from the depths of the darkened doorway, a figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in darkness, their face hidden beneath a hood, their form blending with the night like a ghost. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped into the room, the very air shifting around them. They were here. Whoever they were, they had crossed the threshold of the lodge, and now their presence seemed to fill the room, like the very storm had followed them in. The woman froze, her dark eyes flickering with a mixture of recognition and something far less certain. She straightened, her posture suddenly stiff, the shadows around her almost shrinking back. Her voice was a soft hiss. "You," she began, but the words seemed to die in her throat. "You shouldn't be here." The figure didn't speak. They merely raised their hand and the shadows recoiled. The very air seemed to hum with the force of their presence. The tension in the room grew thick, as if the entire lodge were holding its breath. Elias didn't understand. Who was this figure? And why did the woman seem so afraid? For a moment, he thought the figure might turn toward him, might offer him some kind of salvation, but they didn't. They remained facing the woman, their presence commanding the space with an unspoken authority. Finally, the figure spoke, their voice low and resonant, cutting through the charged silence. "Leave." It was a single word, yet it carried with it the weight of the forest itself, a command that could not be ignored. The woman's face twisted with fury, but she didn't move. Her lips parted as though to speak, but the figure's presence seemed to drain the words from her, leaving only a choking silence. The shadows around her began to waver, trembling in her defeat. "You cannot stop what is already in motion," the woman spat, but even her words held no conviction. She knew, as Elias did, that this stranger, this figure, was not someone to be trifled with. The figure stepped forward again, and the shadows parted before them like a sea of night. The lodge seemed to shudder, the very walls groaning under the weight of the invisible force that filled the room. Elias could feel his pulse quicken, his mind spinning with confusion and fear, but one thing was certain: the balance in the room had shifted. The woman stepped back, her form shrinking into the darkness. "This is not over," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have no idea what you are dealing with." But the figure didn't respond. Instead, they turned slowly, their hooded face still hidden in shadow, and they extended their hand toward Elias. "Come," they said simply, the command gentle but unmistakable. "We must leave." Elias's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know who or what this figure was, but there was something in their presence, something comforting amidst the chaos, that drew him forward. The forest, the shadows, the woman, they all seemed to recede into the distance as the figure reached out toward him. Without a second thought, Elias moved toward the figure, his legs still weak, but his mind clearer than it had been in hours. Whatever this figure was, they were offering him a chance, a way out. And though the forest still whispered around him, its hunger still clawing at his mind, Elias knew one thing for sure. For the first time since he had entered the lodge, he wasn't alone. He had a chance to escape. Elias's heart thudded in his chest as he approached the figure, their presence exuding a calm, impenetrable force that seemed to push back against the suffocating darkness. The shadows that had been closing in on him just moments before now recoiled as if afraid of the figure's power, leaving Elias to wonder just who or what this being was. They were unlike anything he had ever encountered. There was no sense of warmth or humanity to them, just an ancient, chilling presence, as if they were a part of the forest itself, or perhaps something even older. The figure did not speak again, but their outstretched hand was an invitation, a silent command. Elias hesitated for a moment longer, but the weight of the lodge and the woman's cold smile still clung to him, heavy in his chest. The oppressive shadows seemed to shift in response to his hesitation, as though the forest itself were waiting for him to make a choice. With a sharp breath, Elias stepped forward and grasped the figure's hand. The moment his fingers touched the cool, gloved surface, the shadows seemed to evaporate, the grip of the forest loosening for the first time since he'd entered the lodge. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and Elias could finally see clearly. The figure led him forward, their movements smooth and deliberate, and Elias followed instinctively, trusting in their presence even though every part of him screamed for answers. As they walked, the air around them seemed to change. The heavy weight of the lodge and the suffocating darkness loosened, but it did not disappear. There was something else now, a strange, haunting stillness in the air. The whispers that had been so insistent earlier had faded, but in their place was something worse, an unsettling silence, thick with anticipation. They walked through the lodge, past the now empty hearth and through the halls that seemed to stretch longer than they should have, as though the very architecture of the place was a trick, bending to some unseen will. Every step Elias took felt like a step further away from the world he had known, from reality itself. The walls seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards, echoing in the marrow of his bones. The figure moved ahead of him, their cloak trailing behind them like the shadows they commanded. Elias's mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. Who were they? What was this place and why had they come for him? Had they truly come to help him, or was this just another layer of the forest's machinations? Suddenly, the figure halted in front of a door, one Elias hadn't seen before. It was large, made of old oak, and etched with strange runic symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. The wood looked as if it had been untouched for centuries, but the carvings on its surface glowed with an eerie, pale light, their meaning beyond Elias's understanding. His breath caught in his throat as he felt the pull of the door, a force beyond reason, like the call of the forest itself. The figure turned to him, their face still hidden in shadow, but Elias could feel their gaze on him. "This is the way out," they said, their voice deep and resonant. "But it comes with a price." Elias swallowed, his throat dry. "What do you mean? What price?" The figure's fingers brushed lightly against the door, and the symbols on the wood flared brighter for a moment before dimming once more. The figure's expression remained unreadable, their hooded face giving nothing away, but there was something in the air, something dangerous about the door. "This door leads to the boundary between worlds," they explained, their voice quiet but carrying the weight of unspoken knowledge. "It is not the same as the way you came in. The forest has claimed you, Elias, but it has not fully taken you yet. The journey through this door will strip away what it has already claimed and give you a chance to escape. But it is not without sacrifice, not without consequence." Elias took a deep breath, his hands shaking at his sides. He glanced back at the lodge, the shadows now crawling along the walls like living creatures, restless and hungry. His mind flashed to the woman, her cruel smile, the fear in her eyes when the figure appeared. What did she know that he didn't? And what had she meant when she said, "You cannot outrun what is inside you"? Was he already too far gone to leave? Had the forest already claimed a part of his soul, as she suggested? The figure's voice cut through his thoughts again, steady and unwavering. "You are not yet fully theirs, Elias. But if you linger here much longer, the forest will consume you. It is only a matter of time." Elias's pulse quickened as he realized the weight of their words. The forest was more than just the trees, more than the endless expanse of darkened woods. It was something alive, something that felt. He was its guest, its offering, but was it truly something that could be escaped? Could he return to the world he had once known, or was he bound to this place, this nightmare, forever? I don't know if I can go through with it," Elias said, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. "I'm not sure I understand what's happening. What will happen to me?" The figure's head tilted slightly, as if contemplating the question. Their voice dropped lower, a quiet rumble of understanding. "The forest will always remember. Those who pass through the door will be changed. You may return to the world you once knew, but you will not be the same. Part of you will always remain here in the forest as the forest. And should you ever return, the price will be even steeper." Elias felt a cold chill wash over him. What price could be steeper than the one he had already paid? What more could the forest want from him? "Is there any other way?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure paused, and for a long moment, Elias thought they would remain silent. But then, softly, the figure spoke again, their voice like a breath of wind through the trees. "No, there is no other way. You must make your choice, Elias. Walk through this door and leave behind what the forest has taken. Or stay and become part of the forest's hunger forever." Elias's heart raced as he stared at the door, the pulsing symbols seeming to throb in time with his own heartbeat. The shadows around him stretched out once again, their tendrils brushing against his skin, urging him to stay, to give in. But the figure's words lingered in his mind, clear and sharp. "You are not yet fully theirs." The door beckoned. It promised escape. It promised freedom. And yet, Elias felt the weight of the unknown settle heavily in his chest. What lay beyond that door? What would he be leaving behind, and what would he become in the process? For a long, agonizing moment, Elias stood frozen, his mind racing with questions, with fears, with memories of the things he had seen in the forest. The faces in the shadows, the whispers, the creatures that seemed to be born from the very darkness itself. And then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward. The moment Elias took a step forward, a surge of energy rippled through the air, so strong it made the hairs on his neck stand on end. The door, which had seemed so distant and inscrutable just moments before, now felt impossibly close, like the gateway to another reality, a threshold between two worlds. The air itself seemed to hum, vibrating with a strange power that Elias could feel deep in his bones. His chest tightened with both fear and anticipation, his pulse hammering in his throat. The figure beside him remained silent, watching him with a calm intensity that only heightened the feeling that everything hinged on this one crucial decision. The shadows that had been clinging to the walls of the lodge had now gathered in front of the door, swirling like a dark cloud, their twisted shapes writhing and pulsating. It was as though they were alive, as though they were aware of the door's presence and wanted to keep Elias from passing through. For a moment, Elias's mind flashed with the terrifying possibility that the forest itself would fight to keep him trapped within its clutches. The whispers, once faint, grew louder, their voices unintelligible but filled with an eerie urgency. They called to him, begged him to turn back, to stay where he was. They were the voices of the lodge, the forest, the ancient spirits that lived in the roots and the branches, and they were insistent. "You belong here. You will never leave." The words echoed in his mind, clawing at his resolve, but beneath that oppressive darkness, something else stirred. The figure beside him, the one who had guided him through the storm, stood still, their hands still extended toward the door. For a brief moment, Elias's gaze shifted to them, their face still hidden beneath the hood of their cloak. They had not flinched, not even as the shadows closed in, thickening, pressing against him like a suffocating blanket. "You must make your choice now," the figure said, their voice low and steady, the words barely audible over the growing hum of the forest. "The door will not stay open for long." Elias felt his chest constrict. His hands were trembling as he reached for the door's handle. It was cold, colder than anything he had ever felt before, like the touch of death itself, a touch that sent a shock through his arm and straight into his heart. He had never been this close to something so otherworldly, so far beyond his comprehension. The runic symbols on the door glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat as if they were alive. The moment his fingers brushed the wood, a deep, almost imperceptible vibration shot through him, as though the door had recognized his presence. "No turning back," the figure said again, their voice a reminder, a warning, though there was no judgment in it, only an inevitability. Elias knew that once he crossed the threshold, he would be forever changed. He would leave behind everything he had known, his past, his world, and step into something new. A new life, a new reality. But was it truly freedom, or just another form of captivity? The whispers grew louder still, their voices no longer disjointed but now forming a single unified chant. Elias could understand them just barely. "The forest calls you, claims you. You cannot escape what you are." For a moment, Elias faltered. He wasn't sure if he was hearing the forest, or his own fears and doubts whispering in his ear. The shadows, now almost tangible, pressed closer, wrapping around him like a vice. They wanted him to stay. They wanted to consume him. He could feel the weight of their pull, like an invisible hand dragging him back into the depths of the lodge. The door behind him seemed to vanish, swallowed by the darkness, leaving him standing alone in a swirling void. But then, just as quickly, a sudden flash of clarity cut through the fog of confusion that had been clouding his mind. His thoughts turned to the figure, the one who had brought him here, who had given him this opportunity. Their unwavering presence, the calmness with which they stood, waiting, not pressuring him, but simply offering guidance. There was something in that calmness that Elias couldn't ignore. It was not the cold, commanding force of the shadows that had tried to claim him. It was something more compassionate, more human, even if the figure was not. Elias's gaze returned to the door. For all its otherworldly energy, the door had a simplicity to it, a directness. He didn't know what was beyond it. He didn't know what he would become. But he did know one thing. If he stayed, if he let the forest keep him, he would lose himself completely. He would become a shadow, a whisper in the trees, a piece of the endless darkness that had already taken so much from him. The figure's voice, as soft as the wind through the trees, spoke again, this time with a tone of quiet encouragement. "This is your only chance, Elias. The forest will not release you easily. But beyond this door lies a chance to reclaim what is yours." The door before him loomed larger now, not as a barrier but as a threshold, an invitation to something beyond the known, beyond the terrifying uncertainty that had gripped him. The forest's grip on his mind was beginning to slip. His fear still clawed at him, but it was now tempered by a growing resolve. The unknown beyond the door called to him, not with the shrill pull of the forest's hunger, but with the promise of something more. Elias's breath steadied as he tightened his grip on the cold handle. With a final, deep breath, he pushed the door open. The air on the other side was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't cold, nor was it warm. It was an emptiness, a void that felt both empty and infinite at the same time. As the door creaked open, a rush of wind swept through, sharp and clean, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and ancient stone. The forest's oppressive presence began to fade, slipping away like a fading dream. The shadowy figures, the whispers, the weight of the lodge, they all seemed to pull away, retreating into the vastness beyond the door. Elias stepped forward, his foot crossing the threshold, and immediately, the shadows seemed to recoil as though they could not follow him. The world on the other side was vast, stretching endlessly into a deep mist, filled with towering trees whose branches seemed to touch the sky. The air was thick with silence, unnerving, almost too quiet. There were no creatures, no wind, no whispers. Only the stillness and the feeling of something waiting just out of sight. Elias turned to look back, but the door had vanished. It was as though the space beyond it had swallowed it whole, leaving no trace of the lodge, no trace of the shadows, no trace of the woman or the figure who had brought him here. There was no turning back now. His past, the forest, the dark place he had left behind, was gone. Now only the empty forest stretched out before him. But somewhere deep in his gut, Elias felt a stirring. Not fear but something else. A sense of purpose. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time since he had set foot in the lodge, Elias felt that he was no longer running from something. He was walking towards something. The wind shifted, and the silence was broken by a single distant sound, the faint rustling of leaves. A voice, soft but clear, called out from the shadows. "Welcome home." The air on the other side of the door was alive, but not with the oppressive, suffocating presence of the forest Elias had known. It was quiet here, but not in the same way. There was a stillness, yes, but it wasn't threatening. It was vast, infinite almost, as though the land itself was suspended in time. The very atmosphere hummed with an ancient energy, a force that felt as though it had been waiting for Elias's arrival long before he even knew it. As he stepped fully into the new world, the sensation of leaving the forest behind was not so much a relief as it was an unsettling realization. He had crossed into something new, something far stranger and more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. The door behind him had vanished as if it had never existed, swallowed by the very landscape itself. He was now standing in an open, mist-covered forest, but this place was unlike the one that had nearly claimed him. The trees here were not twisted and gnarled like the ones in the lodge. They were tall, proud, their trunks wide and covered in thick, dark bark that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The leaves above him were large, impossibly vibrant, their colors shifting with each breath of wind. But despite the beauty, there was an overwhelming sense of otherness, as though everything was just slightly off. The air had a strange weight to it, as if it was not entirely solid, shifting, almost alive with energy. Elias's gaze shifted to the horizon, but he could not see far. The mist hung thick, curling around the bases of the trees, swallowing the land beyond. Every step he took seemed to echo, amplifying the eerie silence that enveloped him. It felt as though he was standing at the edge of existence itself, in a place untouched by time. Or perhaps, a place between times. The question of what had really happened to him, the door, the figure, the forest, began to gnaw at his mind. Had he crossed into another realm? Had he stepped outside the boundaries of his own world? Or was this still a part of the forest, just a new layer of it, where things were different? The soft whisper of leaves overhead stirred, and the silence was pierced by a sound, a voice distant and faint calling his name. Elias. His heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't the voice of the figure who had guided him through the door. This voice was softer, more fluid, more like a song woven into the fabric of the forest itself. He spun around, searching through the mist, but saw nothing. The mist shifted, swirling as if it too were alive, but there was no sign of any creature, no human figure, no presence except for the towering trees and the strange silence. Elias, come closer. The voice called to him again, and this time it was closer. Elias took a tentative step forward, his senses heightened, the strange, unearthly stillness pressing down on him like a weight. Every step he took seemed to deepen the fog, pulling him into the heart of the forest. The trees around him began to grow closer together, their trunks towering above him like silent sentinels. The mist swirled between them, growing thicker, darker, and Elias felt as though it were guiding him, pushing him forward. The sense of unease, the gnawing feeling that something was wrong, never fully left him, but his curiosity drove him on. What was calling to him? What was this place? And, more importantly, what would he find if he followed the voice? Suddenly, the mist parted for a moment, revealing something in the distance. The shape. It was faint at first, barely discernible, but as Elias walked closer, it became clearer, a figure standing in the clearing ahead. This figure was cloaked in light, surrounded by an aura that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Their face was hidden in the shadows of their hood, but their presence was unmistakable. This was no ordinary person. This was something else. For a moment, Elias stood frozen in place, heart racing in his chest. Was this another part of the forest? Another manifestation of whatever force had taken hold of him? Or was this someone who could help him, who had called him here for a purpose? The figure spoke, their voice soft but carrying through the mist. You are far from home, Elias. You have crossed into a world that is not your own. But you are here now, and there is much you must learn. Elias took a cautious step forward, drawn to the figure despite the unease gnawing at him. His body moved of its own accord, his feet pressing into the soft, damp earth with a quiet rustling of leaves. Every instinct told him to be careful, to tread lightly in this unknown place, but the voice, the presence of the figure, was compelling. What is this place? Elias finally asked, his voice hoarse as if speaking the words had taken some effort. Where am I? The figure did not move, did not speak right away. Instead, they extended one hand, and the mist parted around them, revealing a path that seemed to lead deeper into the forest. The trees ahead were taller now, their trunks covered in runes that glowed faintly in the misty air. The earth beneath Elias's feet was soft, like moss, and the wind, though light, carried an almost melodic hum, as though the very atmosphere had a song to it. This is the Vale, the figure said at last, their voice calm and distant, as if they were speaking of something both familiar and incomprehensible. A world between worlds. A place where the lost come to find their way, and where the forgotten go to rest. Elias's heart tightened. The Vale. A place between worlds. His mind raced as he tried to understand. Was this where the forest's influence ended? Was this a realm of souls? A place between the living and the dead? Or was it something far more complex? A place between realities? What do you mean by the lost? Elias asked, his voice trembling now. What am I doing here? The figure's hood tilted slightly, as though they were observing him more closely, seeing beyond his fear, beyond his confusion. You are not the first to wander into this place, Elias, they replied. But you are one of the few who has crossed the boundary with such intent. The forest claimed you, yes, but you did not belong to it. You were never meant to be part of its hunger. The Vale calls to those like you, those who stand at the crossroads of fate. You have a choice to make. Elias's mind reeled. A choice. The figure nodded, and their voice deepened, becoming more serious. Yes, the forest is not the end of your journey. It was merely a test, a trial to see if you would be strong enough to face what is beyond it. But now that you are here, the real trial begins. To cross the Vale is to face your true self, to confront the darkness within you that the forest was only a reflection of. Will you choose to walk in the light, or will you return to the shadows? Elias swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of their words pressed down on him. The forest had been a test. But this place, the Vale, it was something different. Something far more dangerous, and yet, somehow, it seemed to promise a way out of the nightmare he had been trapped in. And yet, the question still lingered in his mind. What was the price of crossing the Vale? What would it demand of him? The figure's voice broke through his thoughts once again. If you choose to remain, you will never leave the Vale. You will live among the lost, the forgotten. If you choose to return, the forest will still hunger for you. The price will be steep, Elias. But the choice is yours to make. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he stared into the depths of the Vale, the strange, glowing path stretching into the mist. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. No matter the choice, there would be no going back. He took a step forward, the weight of his decision heavy in the air. Elias stood frozen, his gaze locked on the glowing path that stretched endlessly into the Vale. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like an invisible force, a burden heavier than anything he had ever felt. He had crossed through the forest, faced the horrors of the lodge, and now, here he was, standing at the edge of something even greater, something far older and more powerful than he could comprehend. The figure before him waited, their presence silent but omnipresent, as if they knew the gravity of the moment. The wind whispered through the trees, its sound almost like a song, but there was no comfort in it. The air in the vale was thick, charged with a strange energy, and Elias could feel it pulsing, resonating deep within his chest. He had no idea what lay beyond the glowing path. The figure had given him only fragments of an answer, confronting the darkness within him, the trial of his true self. Was that what the forest had been, a mere precursor to this? The place he had left behind, with its twisting shadows and hunger, had been only a test? Then what of the rest of it? What lay in the heart of the vale, and could he truly return to the world he knew if he chose to leave it? The voice of the figure broke the silence, gentle but firm. You feel the weight of it now, don't you? The burden of the choice. Elias nodded slowly, his breath shallow. It felt as though the very ground beneath him was shifting, responding to his thoughts, to his indecision. His heart hammered in his chest, and yet, despite the fear, a strange pull toward the path called to him. It was almost as though it had a life of its own, drawing him closer, urging him to step forward. He took a slow, deliberate step. I don't understand, he said, his voice cracking as the words left his mouth. What does the forest want from me? Why is this place part of it? The figure did not answer right away. Instead, they raised one gloved hand, and the mist around them seemed to part like a veil, revealing more of the path ahead. The trees stretched further into the distance, their trunks thick with ancient markings. The ground beneath Elias's feet was soft, almost sponge-like, as if it were alive, breathing with the land. The air, too, had a quality to it, one that felt both timeless and ever-changing. The figure finally spoke, their voice quiet, but the words carried a weight that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality around them. The forest you fled from was not the source of your suffering, Elias. It was but a reflection of your inner turmoil, a place where your fears manifested, where you faced the pieces of yourself you feared the most. The veil is where you confront those pieces. It is a place where you can confront your true nature. Here, in this land, the boundary between what is real and what is not fades away. It is not a simple choice between returning to what you knew or staying here. It is a choice between accepting who you are and remaining in the shadows of fear. Elias's breath hitched as the weight of the figure's words sank in. His thoughts swirled. Fear. That was it. All this time, everything that had brought him here had been rooted in fear. His fear of the unknown. His fear of being lost. His fear of losing himself, and perhaps even more, the fear of facing what lay inside him. The darkness the woman had spoken of, the hunger, the pull of the forest. Was that the truth? Was it his fear manifesting in these endless shadows and whispers? Was he the one who had created this, or was it simply that he had been trapped by his own mind, by the twisted reflection of his soul? You speak of fear, Elias said slowly, his mind working through the words. But what if I can't face it? What if I can't accept what's inside me? The figure's head tilted slightly, as if considering his words with care. Then they spoke again, their voice softer now, almost tender. None of us are born whole, Elias. We are all pieces of something larger. The darkness within you is not something to fear, but something to understand. It is not about erasing the fear or denying it, but about embracing it. Only then can you free yourself from it. Elias stared at them, his chest tightening. He could feel his breath quicken. His mind raced through fragments of memories, of fears long buried deep within his mind. The feeling of being watched. The sensation that something was always lurking in the corners of his vision, the shadows that followed him, the feeling that he had never truly been alone. The forest had been an extension of that fear. It had fed on it, and in return, it had shown him what he feared most. The helplessness of being lost in a place where nothing was real. The path ahead seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. The land before him was still, but there was a sense of anticipation, an energy that hummed beneath the surface as though something important was waiting for him. The figure remained where they were, watching him with patience. Elias's thoughts swirled faster now, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He was standing at the precipice of something massive, something he could not fully understand. And yet, there was a strange sense of clarity now, as if the questions he had been carrying for so long were beginning to form answers. He had been running from himself, from the things he had buried deep inside. The lodge, the forest, the voices, it had all been a manifestation of his own fear. His fear of losing control. His fear of the unknown. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized. The only way to move forward, the only way to escape this perpetual cycle, was to face it head-on. To embrace the fear. To accept the darkness within him and let it transform into something else. It wasn't about escaping. It was about accepting. Taking a deep breath, Elias squared his shoulders and turned toward the glowing path ahead. He could feel the pull, the gentle but unrelenting tug, urging him forward. The figure said nothing as he stepped forward, their presence remaining a quiet comfort behind him. The trees parted slightly as he walked, the mist swirling around him, but he could see now. The path stretched onward, inviting him into the depths of the veil. As he walked, his mind quieted, the turbulence inside him settling for the first time in what felt like forever. His fear, his doubts, they still lingered, but they no longer controlled him. He would face whatever lay ahead, not as a victim of the forest, but as someone who had finally chosen to take control of his own fate. The further he walked, the more the land seemed to change. The mist thickened, wrapping around his legs like tendrils, and the trees grew taller still, their branches stretching toward the sky. But there was something in the air now, something alive. A soft rustling in the distance drew his attention. He stopped for a moment, heart thudding in his chest. Was it a creature? Another figure? Or something else entirely? From the thick mist ahead, something appeared, something shifting, moving, and Elias couldn't make out its shape. It was large, though, with glowing eyes that reflected the mist around it. "You've made it this far," a deep, rumbling voice echoed, sending a ripple of unease through him. It was not the figure who had guided him here, but something else, something that seemed to belong to the land itself. Elias's hand instinctively moved to his chest, his heart racing, but he was ready now. The air around Elias shifted, thickening with an energy that was almost tangible. The mist parted slowly, as though it had a mind of its own, revealing more of the shape that had emerged from the shadows ahead. It was enormous, taller than any human, broader too, with limbs that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. The glow from its eyes pierced the fog like twin lanterns, illuminating the surrounding space in flashes of pale blue light. Its body was obscured by the mist, but Elias could make out its silhouette, an ancient creature covered in what looked like bark, moss, and vines that seemed to pulse and sway as if alive. The creature's shape was neither purely animal nor human. It was something else entirely, something that existed in the in-between. The deep rumble of its voice resonated through the mist, reverberating against the trees and shaking the earth beneath Elias's feet. "You've made it this far," it said again, its voice thick and grave, like the sound of an ancient bell ringing in the distance. "But not all paths are meant to be walked alone." Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, his mind flitted back to the words of the figure, to the quiet but powerful promise that had brought him here. "You must face your true self." What did this creature mean? Was it one of the guardians of the veil? Something that protected the boundaries of this strange realm? Elias took a hesitant step forward, but the creature's presence was overwhelming, like standing before the towering roots of a tree so old it seemed to pulse with the very essence of the land itself. It was not a feeling of malevolence, but of power. A power that could either be his ally or something far more dangerous. The creature moved, its massive limbs shifting in the fog, and Elias realized it was not alone. Slowly, as the mist parted further, more figures revealed themselves, dozens of them. They stood just beyond the creature, emerging like phantoms from the ether. Some were smaller, hunched and twisted, but others were as tall as the first one, their shapes varying wildly. Each of them was an amalgamation of nature itself, wood, stone, vines, and roots interwoven with the figure's forms, creating living statues. Some had faces obscured by darkness, others had eyes that glowed like the full moon. Some looked peaceful, others fierce. All of them watched him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "You are in the presence of the guardians of the veil," the creature spoke once more, its voice heavy with a sense of ancient authority. "We are the keepers of this place, the ones who ensure that only those with purpose may pass. But you are not like the others." Elias stood still, unsure of what to say, unsure of what was happening. These beings were clearly not of the same world he knew. They were something older, something more primal. They were tied to the veil, perhaps even born of it. But why had they spoken to him? What did they mean by "not like the others"? The tallest of the guardians stepped forward, its face a mass of entwined branches and leaves, with hollow, glowing eyes that seemed to peer into the very core of his being. The air around it shimmered as if reality itself bent in its presence. "You have entered the veil seeking freedom," the guardian said, its voice melodic and yet filled with an underlying darkness. "But freedom is a path fraught with peril. For the freedom you seek is not of the flesh, but of the soul. And such freedom can only be earned." Elias's heart thudded louder, and his breath quickened. The fear that had been building up in him for days, perhaps even longer, was now bubbling to the surface. He had chosen to step forward, to face whatever lay ahead, But did he truly know what that meant? Could he even comprehend the cost of freedom? What must I do? Elias found his voice, though it came out more desperate than he intended. He had to know. There was no turning back now, and the weight of his choice pressed down on him, suffocating him. The guardian tilted its head, and the other figures shifted, their movements slow but deliberate. The ground beneath Elias's feet seemed to pulse with the rhythm of something deep, ancient, and alive. The energy around him grew heavier as the guardians closed the space between them, encircling him like the edge of a storm. Their eyes, glowing with an ethereal light, were fixed upon him, and the silence felt suffocating. To pass the veil, you must face your own shadow, the guardian intoned, its voice now a blend of many voices as though they all spoke together. You are the sum of your choices, your fears, your regrets. These are the things that bind you to the darkness you fled. The forest was a reflection of your soul's corruption, but this place is where you confront it. The true test is not whether you are worthy to leave the veil, but whether you are capable of facing yourself. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Elias felt his body stiffen. The shadow. His shadow. He understood now, in the deepest part of his soul, what the guardian meant. This place was not simply a realm between worlds, it was a realm of truths. And the shadow it spoke of was his own, the parts of him that he had hidden, the parts of him that he had feared would consume him. It was the darkness within himself, the parts of his psyche that he had pushed down for so long, the things that made him feel weak, insignificant, afraid. And now this realm was asking him to confront them. Not just acknowledge them, but face them with no escape, no hiding. The guardian's glowing eyes flickered, and the silence broke as the creature slowly extended a long, gnarled hand toward him. The others followed suit, their hands stretching toward him, a silent but undeniable invitation. The journey through the veil requires sacrifice, the creature continued, its tone softer now, almost sympathetic. You must let go of the things that weigh you down, the fears that tie you to the shadows. Will not be easy. The road ahead will show you truths you may not want to see, but you will not be alone. We will be with you every step of the way. The last words, spoken with a hint of reassurance, should have comforted him, but instead, they only deepened the sense of unease in his chest. The guardians were not his enemies. They were not here to destroy him. They were guides, but their guidance was not without cost. Elias took a slow, shaky breath and let it out. The path ahead was clearer now, but it felt like a vast, uncharted ocean stretching out in front of him. Every instinct in his body screamed to turn back, to run from the unknown, from the suffocating weight of the truth that awaited him. But something stronger, something deeper, kept him rooted in place. His resolve, fragile though it may have been, had been formed long before he had ever entered the veil. He had made it this far, and he could not afford to turn back now. He took another step forward, slowly, deliberately, his feet moving through the soft earth. The guardians stepped aside to allow him passage, their eyes still fixed upon him, their presence a constant reminder of the test he was about to face. As he passed them, the tall figure that had spoken to him before spoke once more, its voice carrying through the thick fog. Remember, Elias, the path to freedom is never straight. You will see things that will tempt you to stay, to return to the comfort of what you knew. But only by facing your deepest fears will you be able to walk through the veil and emerge whole. The shadow is within you, but it does not define you. It is only a part of who you are. The mist thickened again as Elias walked forward, the guardian's words echoing in his mind. He was about to step into the unknown, into a world where his deepest fears would come to life, where the very essence of his being would be tested. But this was the only way forward, and he would face it, no matter the cost. Elias's breath quickened as the mist closed in around him, thickening with every step he took. The guardians, now little more than spectral silhouettes in the distance, seemed to fade away with the fog, leaving him in an eerie solitude. His footsteps were the only sound in the vastness of the veil, the earth beneath him soft but firm. He could still feel their eyes on him, every guardian's gaze heavy and unyielding, but their presence was no longer immediate. Now he was truly alone. The path before him stretched endlessly into the shifting mist, and with each step, he felt an undeniable pull. It was as if the veil itself was drawing him deeper into its heart, into the very core of his being. The trees around him loomed higher, their branches twisting and reaching for the sky, their roots disappearing into the ground like tendrils of the earth itself. The air was thick with energy, charged with something ancient, something almost alive. And then the ground beneath his feet began to shift. It wasn't a sudden change, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. The once soft earth turned jagged and uneven, rocks jutting up from the ground like the bones of some long-forgotten beast. The mist swirled around him faster now, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the land. It wasn't thunder, there were no storms here, but it was a sound of something vast, something unfathomable. The sound of a presence watching. A shape emerged from the shadows ahead, a figure, tall and imposing, rising from the mist like a dark tower. It was not a guardian, nor any of the creatures Elias had seen before. This was something far more personal. The figure's form was indistinct, like a shifting silhouette made of smoke and shadow, but Elias could see the faint outline of a face, one that seemed eerily familiar. It was his own. The figure before him was an exact reflection of Elias, but distorted, like a fractured mirror. His own features were twisted, his eyes hollow and black, his expression unreadable. The face was both his and not his, an impossible, unsettling distortion of everything he had known about himself. The mist thickened around him, swirling in patterns that seemed to move with purpose, as if the very atmosphere was feeding into this illusion. The figure stepped forward, its movements smooth and unhurried, yet there was a presence of immense weight with each footfall. The sound of its steps seemed to reverberate in Elias's chest, like the beat of a heart. "So you've come at last," the figure spoke, its voice Elias's voice, but distorted, ragged, as if something had torn it from his throat. "You've crossed the threshold, walked the path, faced the guardians, but do you know who you are now? Do you even remember?" Elias took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath was shallow, his thoughts racing. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. He was standing before himself, but he was not the man he thought he was. Not anymore. "What are you?" Elias asked, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to stay composed. He knew it wasn't just the mist or the fog. It was the thing inside him, the part of himself he had never dared confront, the part that had remained buried deep in his mind. This was his shadow. The figure's lips twisted into a slow, mocking smile, its eyes never leaving Elias's. "What am I? I'm you. The part of you that you refuse to face. The part of you that has always been there, lurking in the darkness. I am the part of you that you tried to escape. The part of you that the forest wanted, the part that will always follow you." Elias felt the coldness seep into his bones. It was the truth. He had always known it deep down. The fear that had plagued him, the anxiety, the darkness, the sense of being watched, had never been an external force. It had always been within him. The forest had reflected it, the lodge had amplified it, but he had carried it all along. His own fears, his own doubts had shaped his path. The shadow stepped closer, its form rippling and twisting as if it could change its shape at will. The edges of its figure were blurred, not quite solid, like a mirage or a hallucination, but Elias could feel its weight, the suffocating pressure of its presence. "You've run from me your entire life," the shadow hissed. "Always looking for an escape, a way to outrun what's inside of you. The forest was never the problem, Elias. You are the problem. Your fear, your guilt, your regrets. They have always been with you, buried in the corners of your mind, waiting for the right moment to surface." Elias's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his chest tightening with the weight of the shadow's words. He had always known that the true source of his fear, his anxiety, had been himself. But hearing it from this thing, this reflection of his own darkness, felt like a knife to his chest. It wasn't just fear he had been running from. It was the truth about who he had become. "You cannot escape me," the shadow continued, its voice gaining strength, becoming more insistent. "You have spent your life pretending to be something you're not, trying to convince yourself that you are something different. But this place, this veil, shows you the truth. You are nothing but your fears. You are nothing but the darkness you carry with you. And you will never escape me. Not here. Not anywhere." Elias stepped back, his mind spinning. He had to do something, anything, to escape this. The path had led him here for a reason, but the reason wasn't clear. The shadow, his shadow, was the manifestation of everything he had feared, everything he had avoided facing. He couldn't outrun it anymore. He was trapped in the veil, in this land of truth and reality, where every illusion was stripped away, leaving him naked in his own shame, his own weakness. "I am not you," Elias whispered through clenched teeth, trying to summon any shred of defiance that remained in him. "I am not what you say I am. I'm not my fear. I'm not my guilt." The shadow laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that sent a ripple through the fog. "And yet here you are," it taunted, its voice sharp, filled with contempt. "You have spent your entire life running from me, and now you think you can defy me? You cannot escape what you are. You cannot escape what's inside of you." Elias's breath came faster now. He could feel the tears welling up in his eyes, the suffocating weight of the shadow's words pressing down on him. But then something shifted. A quiet realization crept through the chaos in his mind. The shadow was right. He had been running his entire life, hiding from the parts of himself he hated most. The parts of him that felt weak, broken, flawed. But it wasn't enough to just run. It wasn't enough to ignore the parts of himself that he feared. He had to accept them. Elias stood tall, his legs trembling but firm, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of his breath. The shadow was still there, swirling around him, pressing in from all sides, but he was no longer afraid. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been running, but not anymore. You don't define me. You never did. I am more than my fears. I am more than my darkness." The shadow's form flickered, its edges warping, and for the first time, it hesitated. It recoiled slightly, as if taken aback by the change in Elias's voice and his stance. But the moment was fleeting, and the shadow surged forward again, its voice a low, warning hiss. "You cannot escape me," it growled. Elias took a deep breath, his hands open at his sides, and faced the shadow head-on. "Watch me," he said, his voice now full of resolve. Elias stood firm, staring into the abyss of his own reflection. His shadow, flickered and writhed before him like an ancient serpent, trying to twist itself into shapes that no longer made sense. It was his darkness, his fears, but it was not him. Not anymore. The mist around him stirred violently, as if the very land was responding to the tension between them. The shadow, its form flickering like a flame in the wind, surged forward again, its black eyes gleaming with malice. It was faster this time, moving with purpose, its voice a low, seething hiss that echoed in Elias's ears. "You think you can face me? You think you can stand against me and come out unscathed? You will always be this fear, this guilt, this weakness." The words were like daggers, and for a moment, Elias felt his resolve waver. The shadow's words, his own fears, his own self-doubt, pierced him like never before. But as it surged closer, something within him stirred, something that had always been there, buried beneath the fear and the pain. A flicker of light, faint but undeniable. It was the truth he had tried to suppress, the truth that had brought him here. Elias's hand moved to his chest instinctively, the place where his heart beat strongest, where his life pulsed. He could feel it, the warmth, the strength he had never fully acknowledged. It was the very thing the shadow had tried to silence. His will, his resolve, the part of him that refused to give in, to be swallowed by his own darkness. "No," Elias whispered to himself, his voice barely audible but growing stronger with each passing moment. "No, I am not what you say I am." The shadow paused. Its black eyes narrowed, sensing the change. It writhed, its form twisting violently as though it could no longer maintain its shape. The air crackled with energy, a strange tension hanging between Elias and the shadow. The land itself seemed to pulse in time with the beating of his heart, as though everything was waiting for him to make a choice, to finally embrace what he was, what he had always been. Elias took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present. The mist, the trees, the shadow, all of it felt so far away. It was just him now, standing in the center of his own mind, facing the thing that had haunted him for so long. And for the first time in his life, Elias didn't look away. He stepped forward, one foot moving slowly, deliberately, through the jagged earth. The shadow recoiled, its form shifting uneasily as if it sensed what was happening. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no fear now, only clarity. He had spent so long running from his darkness, trying to bury it, to hide from it, but now he realized something that had eluded him all this time. The shadow was not something to defeat. It was a part of him. And to be whole, to truly find peace, he had to accept it. He raised his arms slowly, opening them wide as though embracing the very thing that had once terrified him. The shadow surged forward, but this time, Elias did not flinch. Instead, he let it come, let it surround him, and as it did, he felt a strange warmth spreading through him, like light shining through the cracks of the dark. The shadow recoiled once again, this time more violently. It shrieked, a raw, unearthly sound that echoed through the mist, shaking the earth beneath Elias's feet. He could feel the darkness pressing in around him, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. It was simply there, a part of the landscape of his soul. And for the first time, Elias understood what it meant to be free, not by vanquishing the shadow, but by standing beside it, acknowledging it for what it was, and finding the strength to coexist. "I accept you," Elias said softly, his voice steady. "I accept all of me." The shadow froze. Its form flickered and pulsed, twisting in ways that defied logic, but then, slowly, it began to fade. Not retreat, but transform. The darkness did not vanish completely, but it became something else. Something lighter, less consuming. The air around Elias hummed with energy, the mist clearing for the first time since he had entered the veil. The trees seemed to straighten, their branches stretching upward as if relieved of a great weight. The ground beneath him, once jagged and uneven, softened again, becoming smooth and solid. The shadow, the embodiment of his fear, his guilt, his self-loathing, had not disappeared. It had become part of him, a shadow that no longer controlled him, but walked with him. Elias could feel the energy of the land around him shifting, settling, as if the veil itself had accepted his decision. The figure in the mist, the one who had guided him this far, stepped forward. Elias had almost forgotten it was there, so focused had he been on the shadow. But now, as the mist cleared completely, the figure's presence became undeniable. The guardian was still there, watching, but there was a softness in their eyes, a look of approval. "You have done it," the figure said, its voice gentle now, as though it too felt the shift in the air. "You have faced your shadow and embraced it. You have faced the truth within yourself, and now you are free to choose your path. The veil no longer holds you. You are no longer trapped by what you feared." Elias looked at the figure, his breath steady now, the weight of everything that had happened slowly sinking in. He had faced his own darkness, not by fighting it, but by accepting it. The veil had been a test, but it was more than that. It had been a place of self-discovery, a journey inward to the parts of him that had always been hidden. "I did it," Elias whispered to himself, a feeling of peace settling over him. The mist around him felt lighter now, almost welcoming. He could hear the wind moving through the trees, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint hum of life returning to the land. He had faced his fears, and they were no longer his enemy. The figure nodded, a slight smile on their face. "You are ready, Elias. The path ahead is yours to walk. The veil has shown you who you are. Now you must decide who you will become." Elias took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past lifting off him, piece by piece. The air was lighter now, filled with the scent of the forest, the soft, earthy smell of the land around him. He could hear the faint sound of running water in the distance, the soft murmur of a stream. For the first time since he had crossed the threshold into the veil, Elias felt at peace. The shadow was still there, but it was no longer a monster lurking in the corners of his soul. It was a part of him as much as the light that now filled his heart. He was free. "Thank you," Elias whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. The figure's gaze softened even further, and they nodded once more. "The veil has always known you, Elias. It is not a place of punishment. It is a place of truth. You are ready to walk your own path now. Go forward with the knowledge that the darkness does not define you. You define yourself." Elias smiled, a true smile that reached his eyes. He had come to the veil seeking answers, and he had found them. The path ahead was still unclear, but he no longer feared it. He had learned to walk in the light and the shadow, and he knew now that both were necessary parts of who he was. As he turned and began to walk, the mist parted before him, revealing a path bathed in the soft light of dawn. The journey was far from over, but Elias had finally found the strength to walk it. The path before Elias was no longer just a winding trail through fog and shadow. It was something more now, something he could see clearly without the distortion of fear. The soft light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground, but the light was warm, not cold. The air, once thick and oppressive, had lifted, and with it, Elias felt a sense of renewal that he had not known for years. The veil was behind him, but it would never truly leave him. It had shaped him, transformed him, and he would carry its lessons with him for as long as he lived. Elias took a steadying breath, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. He could hear the distant sound of birds singing in the trees, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the trickle of water in a stream nearby. The world felt alive again, but more importantly, he felt alive. The burden of the past, the shadow of his fears, had been lifted, not erased but accepted. He was whole now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. The guardian who had guided him through the veil stood at the edge of the path, watching him with those patient, knowing eyes. It had not spoken since Elias had embraced his shadow, but there was no need for words now. The silence between them felt heavy, but it was not an oppressive silence. It was a silence of understanding. Elias stopped in front of the guardian, his gaze shifting from the path ahead to the figure standing before him. The guardian's presence was no longer intimidating, it was comforting, reassuring, like the embrace of a long-lost friend. You said that the path ahead was mine to choose, Elias said, his voice soft but resolute. But what happens now? What is beyond the veil? What lies on the other side? The guardian tilted its head slightly as if considering the question. Its face, once obscured by the mist, was now fully visible. It was neither young nor old, but somewhere in between, ageless, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless lifetimes. The guardian's features were serene, almost calm, as if it were part of the very landscape around them. The path you walk now, Elias, is the one you choose, the guardian answered, its voice low and resonant, like the hum of the earth itself. The veil was a place of truth, a place of confrontation. But beyond it lies the world. It is where you will put into practice what you have learned. The veil was but a beginning, not an end. Elias nodded, the gravity of the words settling deep within him. He had always thought the journey would end once he confronted the darkness within himself, but it hadn't. It had only just begun. He had faced the shadow, learned to live with it, and now he had to live with the knowledge that his life would never be the same. There would be no turning back. But for the first time, Elias felt ready. I'm not sure where to go next, Elias admitted, his gaze shifting to the path ahead, still cloaked in the soft light of morning. But I know that I can't stay here forever. The guardian took a step closer, its gaze softening even further. You are not meant to stay here, Elias. The veil is not a place of permanence. It is a threshold, a place of passage. The world beyond is where you will create yourself, where you will shape your future from the lessons of your past. Elias took a deep breath. The weight of those words was like a spark that ignited something within him. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first entered the veil. The darkness that had once threatened to consume him was now a part of his story, no longer something to fear, but something to understand. It wasn't just about confronting his past or overcoming his fears. It was about moving forward, growing from them. He wasn't running anymore. He was living. The path ahead seemed to stretch on endlessly, but now Elias didn't feel lost. For the first time, he felt a sense of direction, a quiet confidence that had been lacking before. The uncertainty of the future no longer terrified him. He could handle whatever came his way because he had faced the hardest part of the journey, himself. But there was still one question that lingered in the back of his mind, one he hadn't asked before. And the forest? Elias asked, his voice tentative but curious. Will it always be a part of me? The guardian didn't answer immediately, but when it did, its voice was filled with an ancient wisdom that reached beyond time. The forest is a part of you just as the veil is. The forest represents the parts of you that remain unexplored, the parts that are still growing, still changing. It is not something to escape, nor something to conquer. It is a place of transformation, and it will always be there when you need it. But remember, Elias. The guardian's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, Elias felt as though the very fabric of the universe was passing between them. The forest is not your enemy. You were never meant to fight it. You were meant to learn from it, just as you learned from the shadow within yourself. The forest does not define you. You define it. Asterisk. Elias nodded slowly, taking in the guardian's words. He understood now. The forest had been a reflection of his inner turmoil, his confusion, his fears, but it was not a place of permanent darkness. It was a place of growth. And just as he had learned to accept the shadow, he would learn to accept the forest for what it was. A mirror of his own soul, always changing, always evolving. The wind shifted, blowing through the trees, and the light grew brighter, the soft glow of dawn giving way to the full light of day. Elias glanced down the path before him, and for the first time he saw it clearly. It wasn't a dark, twisted trail leading into the unknown. It was a road filled with possibility, stretching forward into the horizon, open and wide, like the beginning of something new. The guardian placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, its touch warm and grounding. Go now, Elias. The world awaits you. You are ready. And with that, Elias stepped forward, leaving the guardian behind, leaving the veil. The fog that had once enveloped him began to dissipate, and the soft light of the morning bathed everything in its golden glow. The trees, the rocks, the earth beneath his feet, everything was real again, and it was beautiful. The world felt alive, full of potential, full of life. He didn't know what the future would bring, but it didn't matter. He had faced the darkness within himself, had confronted the fears that had once ruled his life, and had emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but whole. And that was enough. As he walked down the path, the wind in his hair and the sun warming his face, Elias smiled for the first time in years. His journey had just begun, but now he was ready. The path ahead of Elias wound through the forest, but it was no longer the twisted, dark labyrinth that had once intimidated him. The trees, still tall and ancient, now stood proudly in the light, their leaves shimmering like gold in the sun. The scent of pine and earth filled the air, a far cry from the oppressive, stifling atmosphere of the vale. The path was clear, winding gently through the woods, leading him into the unknown, but now there was no fear in that unknown. The uncertainty no longer felt like a threat. It felt like freedom. The light of day, bright and warm, poured through the canopy above, casting long, dappled shadows across the forest floor. Elias felt the warmth on his skin, the cool breeze on his face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt alive. The burden of the past had been left behind, and with it, the endless questions, the spiraling thoughts, the constant battle between fear and hope. His footsteps were steady now, no longer hesitant. Each step was a reminder that he was moving forward, leaving the past behind and embracing the present. The future was unwritten, but it no longer felt like a chaotic, uncontrollable force. Elias knew now that he had the power to shape it. He had learned from the veil that the road ahead wasn't just something to walk, it was something to build. And yet, as he moved deeper into the forest, something unexpected happened. The trees, which had once felt like silent, looming witnesses, now seemed to shift with purpose, their branches swaying in a gentle rhythm that mirrored Elias's heartbeat. The breeze carried whispers with it, soft and indistinct, like voices on the wind. It wasn't frightening, though. In fact, it was strangely comforting, as if the very land was welcoming him. Elias stopped, feeling a strange pull in his chest. The air around him seemed to thicken, vibrating with a subtle energy. For a moment, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. The whispers grew louder, the words now more distinct, but still beyond his comprehension. When he opened his eyes, there was a figure standing in the clearing ahead of him. The figure was tall, draped in a cloak of deep, rich green, like the very fabric of the forest itself. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Elias could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it were watching him with ancient eyes. It was not a creature of the veil, nor a guardian. This was something different, something he had not encountered before. It was not hostile, but there was a quiet authority in its presence. The figure stood still, unmoving, yet it seemed to pulse with energy, as though it were part of the forest, as much a part of this land as the trees themselves. Elias took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest, but this time, it wasn't fear that made it beat faster. It was curiosity. The forest had shown him so much already, its true nature, its connection to the land, to the veil, to himself, and he knew that this figure, whatever it was, had something important to reveal. The figure spoke then, its voice soft but resonant, carrying an otherworldly calm. "You have crossed the threshold, Elias." The words sent a ripple through him, a shiver of recognition. This voice, it wasn't unfamiliar. He had heard it before, in the whispers of the forest, in the distant murmurs of the wind. It was the same voice that had guided him through the veil, the same voice that had spoken of truth and self-acceptance. "You," Elias began, but his voice faltered. He wasn't sure what to say. "Who are you?" The figure did not move, but Elias could feel its presence, like a deep-rooted force within the earth itself. "I am the heart of the forest," the figure said simply, its tone filled with the wisdom of ages. "The keeper of the land spirit. I have watched you, Elias, as you traveled through the veil. Your journey has only just begun, but you are not the same person who entered. You are stronger now, more attuned to the land, to yourself. And that is why you are here." Elias felt a weight settle in his chest. The heart of the forest? What did that mean? Was this being a manifestation of the land itself? The very earth beneath his feet? He wasn't sure, but there was something undeniably ancient about it, something that made him feel as if he were standing in the presence of something far greater than he could fully comprehend. "You've been through the veil," the figure continued, its voice gentle but filled with a profound force. "The forest is not just a place of growth, Elias. It is a living, breathing entity, woven into the fabric of the world. The shadows you've faced, the darkness you've learned to accept, they are but one piece of the larger puzzle. You have felt it, the pulse of the land, the rhythm of its heartbeat. But there is more to it. There is more to you." Elias took a step closer, the figure's words stirring something deep within him, something that he couldn't quite place. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The heart of the forest raised its hand slowly, and the air around Elias seemed to shimmer. The trees around them responded, their leaves rustling as if they were listening, their branches swaying in time with an unseen rhythm. The forest itself seemed to be alive, more so than Elias had ever imagined. "You are connected to the land, Elias," the figure said, its voice echoing in the stillness. You have always been. The forest, the veil, the shadows, it is all part of your soul, part of the world's soul. But you must learn to listen. The land speaks to those who are open to it. It is a gift, a power, but it is also a responsibility. You must be its keeper just as it is yours. Elias's heart skipped a beat. The land? The veil? The forest? Was this what he had been sensing all along? The subtle whispers in the wind, the pulse in the trees? The deeper connection he had felt as he walked through the veil? Was all real. He wasn't imagining it. It was as if he had been chosen not just to face his own fears, but to guard this place, to protect it, to be a part of it. You're saying I have a purpose? Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure nodded. Yes. Your journey is not over, Elias. It has only just begun. The forest is alive and so are you. You are a part of it now as it is a part of you. There will be trials ahead, challenges that will test you in ways you cannot yet understand. But you are not alone. The land is with you and it will guide you, just as it has guided all those who have come before you. Elias stood there, stunned, his mind spinning with the magnitude of what was being said. He had come to the veil seeking answers, hoping to escape the darkness within him. But now, standing before the heart of the forest, he realized that the answers were far more complex than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't just facing his own fears. He was stepping into a world that had been waiting for him, a world that was far older, far deeper than anything he had ever known. The heart of the forest extended its hand, and the air around it shimmered with energy. Will you accept your place, Elias? Will you stand as a guardian of the land, as its keeper, and let the forest guide you toward your destiny? Elias's heart beat faster, but this time, there was no hesitation. He had faced his fears. He had accepted the darkness within him. And now he understood. This was his path. This was where he belonged. He nodded slowly, his voice steady but filled with a newfound certainty. Yes, he said, his voice clear and strong. I will accept my place. And as he spoke those words, the forest around him seemed to breathe. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in a symphony of sound, and the trees whispered their approval. The heart of the forest smiled beneath its hood, its eyes gleaming with ancient knowledge. Then your journey has truly begun, Elias. Welcome home. And with that, Elias stepped forward, the path ahead now clear and filled with purpose. The world was waiting, and he was ready to embrace it. Elias felt the weight of the forest settle over him as he stood before the heart of the forest. The world around him seemed to hold its breath, every rustling leaf and creaking branch vibrating with a deep, almost sacred energy. The air hummed with the unspoken power of the land, a subtle force that resonated within him, echoing the heartbeat of the earth. His heartbeat. He had accepted his place, his purpose. The knowledge that he was now connected to the forest, that the land itself had chosen him to stand as its guardian, filled him with both a sense of awe and profound responsibility. The heart of the forest's words reverberated in his mind, grounding him in the moment, yet also pulling his thoughts forward to the vast, unknown challenges that awaited him. The path ahead, once a simple trail through the trees, now felt like a gateway to something far greater. The trees around him stood tall and eternal, their bark gnarled and weathered by centuries of time. The ground beneath his feet was firm, solid, a connection to the land that ran deeper than anything Elias had ever known. The forest speaks, Elias. The heart's voice echoed once more, drawing his attention back to the cloaked figure. Its words were both a reminder and a warning. And it speaks to you. But you must learn to listen. The land will show you its needs, its pains, its desires. And in return you must protect it. Elias nodded, his breath steady, his heart calm. The reality of what he had committed to was beginning to settle in. He was not just a wanderer, a lost soul seeking answers. He was now a part of something much larger, something ancient, something eternal. He wasn't just living in the world anymore, he was of it. And that was both a privilege and a burden. I understand, Elias said, his voice steady but filled with a depth he hadn't known he possessed. His hands felt warm at his sides, the faint thrum of life from the forest pressing against his skin. The heart of the forest stepped back slightly, raising one hand to the sky. Then I ask you, Elias, to take the oath, to become not just a protector of this land, but a part of its very spirit. Are you ready to walk the path of the keeper? The figure's voice was low and resonant, like the sound of ancient trees groaning in the wind. There was no hesitation now in Elias's heart. He had already made his choice. He was ready. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever burdens the forest demanded of him, he was prepared to face them. Yes, Elias replied, the word feeling powerful as it left his lips. I am ready. The heart's hand descended, and the mist around them stirred. The trees seemed to lean closer, the wind carrying the sound of whispers that were too distant to understand but filled with urgency. The very earth seemed to listen in anticipation. Then listen closely, the heart intoned, its voice filled with ancient wisdom. The keeper's oath is not merely a vow of protection, but a bond with the land itself. You will hear its cries in the rustling leaves, its songs in the wind, its stories in the streams. You will carry its wounds as if they were your own, and its triumphs will become yours. The oath binds you to the land and the land to you. Elias stood tall, his heart resolute. The weight of the word settled around him, and he could feel the forest responding, as though every tree, every stone, every blade of grass was now watching him, waiting for him to make the promise that would mark the beginning of his true path. With a slow, deliberate motion, the heart of the forest raised both hands to the sky, and the very air seemed to shimmer with power. The earth beneath Elias's feet began to hum, the sound of ancient roots stirring deep within the soil, like the deep breath of a sleeping giant. The wind swirled, lifting the hem of his cloak and tousling his hair. The land itself seemed to lean in, awaiting the oath. Repeat after me, the heart said, its voice rich and reverberating. I, Elias, keeper of the forest, vow to protect and nurture this land, to walk in harmony with its spirit, to hear its whispers and answer its call. I will honor the earth, the trees, the creatures, and the sky, and in return, I will be its shield and its sword. Elias took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving the figure before him. His voice rang out, steady and true as he repeated the words. I, Elias, keeper of the forest, vow to protect and nurture this land, to walk in harmony with its spirit, to hear its whispers and answer its call. I will honor the earth, the trees, the creatures, and the sky, and in return, I will be its shield and its sword. As the final word left his lips, a surge of energy pulsed through him, like the earth had taken his vow and wrapped it around him like a living cloak. His body felt lighter, yet heavier at the same time, as if he had been bound to the land itself, tied to it with invisible threads that ran through the very marrow of his bones. His senses heightened, his breath became deep and purposeful, and the very air around him felt alive, vibrating with power, with connection, with an ancient knowledge that filled him from the inside out. The heart of the forest lowered its hands, and a soft smile, one that conveyed an ancient pride, crossed its hidden face. You have spoken the truth, Elias. The oath has been heard. The land has accepted you. Now you will be its keeper. A strange feeling of peace washed over Elias, but it was not the kind of peace he had known in the past. It was not the absence of conflict or fear. No, this peace was deeper. It was the calm that comes from knowing that no matter what happens, no matter how tumultuous the journey ahead might be, he was part of something far greater than himself. He was part of the land, part of the forest, part of the eternal cycle of life and death, growth and decay. But just as the peace settled over him, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath his feet, like thunder rolling across the sky. The trees trembled, their branches swaying violently as though responding to some unseen force. The wind picked up, howling now, and the mist around them thickened, swirling in ominous patterns. Elias's heart skipped a beat. The heart of the forest raised its hand again, its expression shifting from serene to urgent. There is unrest in the land, Elias. The bond you have sworn is already being tested. The forces that seek to harm the forest, to tear it apart, are stirring. The balance is fragile. Be ready. The trials of the keeper begin now. Elias's pulse quickened, his gaze darting around as the forest seemed to shift and grow restless. Something was wrong. Something dark was on the horizon. And yet, as the wind howled and the earth trembled beneath him, Elias felt no fear. He was the keeper now. The land had chosen him, and he had sworn to protect it. I am ready, he whispered to himself, the words feeling like a declaration, a promise. The heart of the forest nodded, its eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. Then go, Elias. The first trial is upon you. And with that, Elias turned and stepped forward into the depths of the forest, his path now marked by the weight of his new purpose. The land was calling him, its whispers growing louder with each step. The trials would come. The darkness would test him. But he would face them all, not as a man lost and alone, but as the keeper of the forest. And whatever came, he was ready. Elias walked deeper into the forest, the mist parting around him as he moved. The wind howled through the branches, a deep, almost mournful sound that seemed to be calling him. The trees swayed ominously, their branches creaking like old bones. The path ahead, once clear and inviting, now felt far more foreboding. The weight of the forest's whispers grew louder in his ears, and the very earth beneath him seemed to tremble with a subtle urgency. The heart of the forest's words echoed in his mind. The trials of the keeper begin now. Elias had sworn his oath, but now he realized that the forest wasn't just offering him protection. It was testing him, pulling him into something far more complex than he had imagined. The land itself had chosen him for a reason, but the challenges ahead were not to be taken lightly. He continued forward, each step bringing him further into the heart of the woods. The trees seemed to grow denser now, their trunks twisted and gnarled, as if the very earth was shifting in response to his presence. The mist thickened again, curling around his feet like restless spirits, and the air grew heavy with a strange, unsettling energy. Elias's senses were on high alert. The forest was alive in ways he couldn't fully understand. The ground beneath his boots felt warm, pulsing with the beat of the land, but the air itself felt charged, as though something unseen was watching him, waiting. The wind shifted, sending a chill through his body, and a sharp sound pierced the air, something like a distant howl, but too high-pitched, too unnatural. Elias froze, his heart racing. The sound came again, closer this time, echoing through the trees. It wasn't the wind this time. It was something else. Something alive. He reached for the dagger at his side, his fingers brushing the hilt of the weapon. His grip tightened, though he wasn't sure what threat lay ahead. The wind died down, and for a moment the forest fell completely silent. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his pulse quickened. The ground beneath him trembled again, this time stronger, and he felt a strange, gnawing sensation in his chest, like a whispering voice, so faint it was almost imperceptible. Danger is near, keeper. The balance is in jeopardy. Elias stopped, his breath shallow, his gaze darting through the shadows. The whispers of the forest, which had once felt like a gentle guide, now carried an undertone of warning. He was no longer just walking in the forest. He was a part of it, and the forest itself seemed to be telling him that something was amiss. Then, from the corner of his eye, something moved. A flicker of shadow, barely perceptible, vanished behind a tree. Elias stiffened, his senses on high alert. He turned slowly, scanning the trees, but there was no movement now, only the eerie stillness of the forest around him. But the stillness didn't last. Suddenly, the ground cracked with a violent tremor, and Elias barely had time to react as a figure burst from the underbrush, moving faster than he could comprehend. It was dark, too dark, like a shadow given shape, and it moved with unnatural speed, its body long and sinewy, its eyes glowing with a faint, sickly yellow light. Before Elias could draw his weapon, the creature lunged, slashing at the air with talons that gleamed like bone. The smell of damp earth and decay filled Elias's nostrils as he stumbled back, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike. His heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins, but the creature didn't stop. It circled him, its movements fluid and predatory, its yellow eyes locking onto him with chilling intensity. Elias knew this was no ordinary beast. It was something born of the darkness, a creature that had no place in the balance of the forest. And it was here to test him, to see if he was truly worthy of the oath he had sworn. The creature's teeth snapped with a terrifying speed, and Elias barely managed to block the blow with his dagger. The force of the strike reverberated through his arm, and he gritted his teeth against the pain, taking a step back. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had faced darkness before, he could do it again. The creature hissed, its voice like a rasping whisper in his ear. "You think you can protect this land? You, the new keeper, so young, so weak." The words were venomous, dripping with scorn. "The forest will fall. The darkness is coming for it, and you are nothing but a fool who stands in its way." Elias's blood ran cold, but his resolve remained. This was a test, a trial to prove his worth. He had sworn an oath, and no matter the odds, he would not fail. The creature lunged again, its claws slicing through the air. Elias leaped to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. He could hear the creature's breath, harsh and ragged, its body twisted and unnatural, as it circled around him again, hunting him like prey. Elias's hand tightened around the hilt of his dagger, the weight of the weapon grounding him. He wasn't just a man. He was a keeper. The keeper. And he would not allow the darkness to claim the forest. The creature attacked again, faster this time, but Elias was ready. He pivoted, dodging the strike, and with a swift motion, he slashed his dagger across the creature's side. It howled in pain, its dark form flickering, but it did not relent. Instead, it shrieked, a sound so sharp it seemed to pierce the very air. The creature staggered back, its eyes narrowing as it regarded Elias with a mixture of hatred and fear. For a moment, Elias thought he saw something else in its gaze. a flash of recognition, something more ancient than mere malice. But before he could react, the creature lunged once more, its claws outstretched. But this time Elias was ready. He waited for the perfect moment, his breath steady, his focus unyielding. As the creature came within range, he spun, dodging the strike and thrusting his dagger into the creature's chest. It let out a guttural cry, its body convulsing in pain before it crumpled to the ground, the shadows around it dissipating like smoke. Elias stood over the creature, panting heavily, his dagger still in hand. The creature's body began to disintegrate, its dark form unraveling into nothingness. And with that, the oppressive energy that had filled the air began to lift, the forest once again growing still. He looked down at his weapon, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He had done it. He had faced the darkness and prevailed. But even as the adrenaline faded, a deep unease settled in his gut. This was only the beginning. The forest was not safe. There were darker forces at work, and this creature, whatever it was, had been only the first. Elias knew now that the true test of his oath had only just begun. The balance of the forest was fragile, and the darkness that sought to destroy it would not be easily defeated. He could feel the weight of the land's need pressing down on him, its call stronger than ever. The forest had chosen him, but now it was time to prove that he was worthy of its trust. The trial was over, but Elias could sense the storm was far from finished. And as the wind began to stir once more, he knew that the true dangers of the forest had only just begun to reveal themselves. The wind whispered through the trees again, but this time the forest felt different. It was not the same peaceful place Elias had entered. Something had shifted. The echoes of the creature's shrieks still reverberated in the air, and the oppressive weight of its presence lingered in the shadows between the trees. Elias's heart still beat quickly, his pulse sharp in his ears. But as the dark creature's form disintegrated into nothingness, another, deeper realization settled in. This was no ordinary trial. The creature that had attacked him was not just a manifestation of the forest's unrest. It was something darker, something far older. Its very essence was wrong, out of sync with the natural rhythm of the land. Elias had barely registered the creature's words in the heat of the battle, but now they returned to him with a clarity that made his skin crawl. The forest will fall. The darkness is coming for it, and you are nothing but a fool who stands in its way. It wasn't just an attack. It was a warning. The shadows around him seemed to stretch longer now, the trees swaying more violently in the rising wind, the mist thickening once again, swirling like a living thing. Elias's gaze darted around, his senses heightened to a razor's edge. Something was moving in the dark. Something far more than just the wind. He wiped his brow, sweat and dirt mixing on his skin. His hand still gripped the hilt of the dagger tightly, the weapon a lifeline in his palm. But the forest around him seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, like an ancient heart that was beginning to beat once again, slow, steady, and foreboding. Elias took a deep breath and turned in the direction of the path ahead. He had to move forward. The creature was gone, but it had left something behind. A sense of dread, a warning that things were not as they seemed. The forest was not just at risk from the darkness, it was already being affected by it. He stepped forward, his footsteps quiet on the forest floor, but the air felt heavy with an unseen presence. The trees above him groaned with the wind's force, and the roots beneath his feet seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was restless. Elias's connection to the land, once steady and secure, felt fractured, like a crack in the foundation of a long-abandoned building. As he walked, the whispers of the forest returned. At first they were soft and indistinct, like the wind through the leaves. But then as he pressed on, the whispers grew clearer. The sound wasn't just in the wind anymore. It was in the very fabric of the forest itself, winding through the branches and roots, curling around him like vines. "Keeper," the voice came again, low and soft. "The land is not what it once was. There are forces here that have slumbered for eons, forces that have begun to stir once more." Elias stopped, looking around, but he could see nothing. No figure, no entity that might be speaking. Only the forest around him. His breath quickened. He had heard the forest speak before, but this was different. The words weren't just a whisper, they were a warning, a plea. The voice continued, its tone sorrowful. "There are roots of darkness that run deep through this land. They have been buried, forgotten by time, but they are waking now. The creature you faced is one of them. But it is only the beginning." Elias's pulse thudded in his chest. His mind raced to make sense of what he was hearing. Roots of darkness? Forces that had been buried? The heart of the forest had spoken of balance, of protecting the land, but Elias had not realized how fragile that balance truly was. This darkness wasn't a mere enemy to face in battle. It was something woven into the land, something that had been a part of it from the beginning. The voice grew stronger, its words like echoes through the vastness of time. The roots of darkness run deep, Elias. They have spread beneath the surface of the land, feeding off the fear and hatred of those who once walked here. They are ancient, older than the trees themselves, and they seek to reclaim what was once theirs. They will tear apart the harmony of the forest, and with it they will claim the world. Elias's chest tightened. This was far beyond anything he had prepared for. His role as keeper was not just to protect the trees, to guard the creatures of the forest. It was to confront this deep-seated evil, this ancient force that had lain dormant for so long. And it had already begun to stir. The voice seemed to guide him now, leading him deeper into the forest, the path growing increasingly twisted and narrow. The once familiar woods were becoming unfamiliar, distorted, as though the very land was shifting in response to his presence. The mist thickened again, swirling in great, oppressive clouds that choked the air and obscured his vision. The land felt raw. The peace he had once felt here had been shattered, replaced with a sense of dread that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The trees, once living pillars of strength, now seemed bent, twisted, their branches heavy with a dark energy that weighed down the atmosphere. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, a steady, sickening rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. Elias paused and looked around, his grip tightening on his dagger. The air was thick with an unnatural tension. The whispers were louder now, clearer, almost frantic. The land was hurting. Something had begun to take root deep within the earth, something that sought to consume it all. The balance must be restored, the voice urged. The roots of darkness must be severed before they spread beyond the forest, beyond the land. You must find the heart of this evil, Elias. You must cut it out before it destroys everything. The words were sharp, cutting through the thick air. Elias felt the weight of their meaning sink into his chest. He wasn't just here to protect the forest from what was already threatening it. He was here to save it. He was the only one who could stop this darkness from spreading beyond the forest borders, beyond the land itself. The stakes were higher now than he could have ever imagined. And in that moment, the realization hit him like a blow to the chest. This was not just a trial. This was a battle for the soul of the world. Elias could feel the presence of something massive, something dark, gathering ahead, deep within the forest's heart. It wasn't just a monster he could fight with his dagger. It was an ancient force that sought to devour everything, to claim the very land he had sworn to protect. The forest was alive and it was in pain. But Elias knew what he had to do. He had to go deeper. The land needed him. And no matter how dark, how twisted the forest became, he would not back down. He would not let the roots of darkness destroy this world. He took a deep breath, pushing past the fear that tried to claw at his mind, and began walking again. The path was unclear now, the mist thick and suffocating, but Elias knew one thing for certain. The forest was calling him, and he would answer. Elias's steps felt heavier now, each one sinking into the soft, shifting earth, as though the land itself was testing his resolve. The air had grown thick with the fog, dense and suffocating, obscuring his vision to mere shadows. The trees around him seemed to close in, their gnarled branches twisting and stretching like hands reaching for him. The once vibrant greens and browns of the forest were now muted by a creeping, unnatural darkness that permeated the space. The ground felt colder, harder, as if the land itself were being suffocated by a slow, creeping disease. The whispers were relentless now, constantly tugging at the edges of his mind, calling to him, warning him. He could hear them more clearly now, echoing in the air like faint cries of desperation, fading in and out, just beyond his comprehension. Some of the whispers were familiar, the soft murmurings of the trees, the rustle of the leaves in the wind. But others were darker, more distorted, like voices trapped in agony. Keep moving, Elias. Do not stop. The voice of the forest, a comfort to him before, now felt like a warning. He wasn't just walking deeper into the woods, he was walking into something far older, far more dangerous. The very air was thick with the tension of ancient forces stirring beneath his feet, forces that were neither benevolent nor forgiving. And then, through the dense fog, he saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, an outline against the faint glow of the dimming sky. But as he moved closer, it became clearer. It was a structure, tall and looming, half covered by vines and moss. The stonework was ancient, weathered by time, its surface cracked and crumbling, as though it had been forgotten by history itself. A lodge. The darkened silhouette of the lodge loomed like a broken relic, its windows empty and hollow, its doors gaping open like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. The air around it felt colder still, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if warning him not to enter. This wasn't just any lodge. Elias could feel it, the weight of its history pressing down on him. It was as if the structure had been waiting for him, for this moment. He had seen it before, in fragments, in fleeting visions within the veil. It was a place steeped in the very darkness that now threatened the forest. And he knew without question that this was where the roots of the darkness had begun. This was the heart of the evil that had spread beneath the land. The lodge's wooden beams groaned in the wind, but there was no warmth here, no life. It was cold, hollow, a place that felt like it had been forsaken by time. The land had long since abandoned it, but it was still standing, anchored to the earth like a wound that refused to heal. Elias stepped forward, his boots crunching softly against the dead leaves. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, their voices overlapping with a strange urgency. Come inside, Keeper. The truth is within. Find the heart of the darkness. Despite the rising sense of unease, Elias pressed on, drawn to the door that hung ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. The atmosphere thickened with each step, the air turning heavier with an unnatural cold that seemed to seep into his bones. The mist clung to the ground in tendrils, swirling around his legs like unseen hands. He stepped through the doorway and the temperature inside plummeted. The lodge was dark, save for the faint glow of dying embers from a fireplace that had long since extinguished. The wood inside was decayed, rotting in places, the scent of mildew and dampness filling his nostrils. Dust had settled on everything, a thick layer of neglect and abandonment. But there were signs of something else, something recent. Something had been here. The furniture was overturned, the remnants of old tapestries hanging in tatters on the walls. Yet, amidst the ruin, there was a disturbing stillness, an oppressive silence that weighed heavily in the air. The oppressive feeling of wrongness suffocated him, and Elias couldn't shake the sensation that the lodge was alive, not in the way a living thing is, but in a way that suggested it was waiting for him. The whispers grew sharper, more distinct. And then, in the dead silence of the room, Elias heard it, the unmistakable sound of a low, rumbling growl coming from the far side of the room. He froze, his heart hammering in his chest. His breath caught in his throat, and his hand instinctively reached for his dagger. The darkness in the lodge seemed to stir, coiling like a snake, thick and suffocating. The growl came again, followed by a deep, guttural voice, thick with malice and hunger. You shouldn't have come here, Elias. The air around him pulsed with malevolence as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a shape, shifting, undulating like the very darkness itself. Elias's mind screamed to fight, to draw his weapon, but there was something about the presence that froze him in place, something deeply primal that made him feel small and insignificant. The figure stepped forward, and Elias's breath caught in his throat. It was no creature of flesh and bone. It was a manifestation of darkness itself, a shadow woven together from the very fabric of the world. Its eyes gleamed with a sickly yellow light, its form a twisting, formless mass of shadow, its limbs long and clawed, reaching out like the roots of some ancient, poisonous plant. It exuded an aura of rot, decay, and hunger, a hunger that stretched out beyond the lodge, beyond the forest, to the very heart of the world. You are the keeper, it hissed, its voice dripping with scorn. The one who dares to challenge the ancient balance. You are nothing, just another fool who thinks they can stand against the darkness that I have brought into this world. Elias gripped his dagger tighter, his pulse pounding in his ears. The whispers had turned to screams now, a chorus of agony echoing in the corners of his mind, urging him to run, to flee from the shadow that loomed before him. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. This was the heart of the darkness. This was the force that threatened to consume the forest, to unravel the very fabric of life. He squared his shoulders, lifting his chin. I am the keeper of this land, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. And I will not let you destroy it. The shadow laughed, a sound that rattled his very bones. You are too late, Keeper. The roots have already begun to spread. You are nothing but a fleeting moment in time, and the forest will fall. The darkness has already taken root. Soon, there will be nothing left but the endless night. But Elias stood firm, his eyes narrowing. The darkness may have spread beneath the land, but it hadn't yet consumed it. The forest was still alive, and as long as it was, he had a chance. I will stop you, Elias said, his voice fierce despite the overwhelming presence of the shadow. The balance will be restored. I swear it. The shadow seemed to hesitate, its form writhing like a trapped snake. The malevolent energy pulsed, pressing in from all sides. We shall see, Keeper. We shall see. And as the darkness surged forward, Elias knew this was no longer just a battle for the forest. This was a battle for the very soul of the land. And as long as he stood, he would fight. The shadow before Elias seemed to grow taller, stretching upward like a living nightmare, its claws scraping the air with an almost tangible hunger. Its eyes gleamed, glowing like embers from the depths of hell, flickering with ancient malice. The ground beneath his feet trembled as the creature's presence pressed in on him, suffocating the very air. It was as if the lodge itself had become a part of the darkness, a vessel for the twisted force that threatened to tear apart the land. Elias's heart raced, but there was no hesitation in his steps. The vision of the forest, the trees, the creatures, the very land he had sworn to protect, flashed in his mind. The bond he shared with the forest wasn't just a connection, it was a purpose. And no matter how deep the darkness reached, he would not let it consume the world he had come to love. With a growl that reverberated through his chest, Elias gripped his dagger, the steel cold and steady in his hand. His mind raced, weighing his options. He couldn't defeat this force with strength alone. This shadow wasn't a simple creature. It was an embodiment of something much more ancient and insidious. Something far more dangerous. The darkness hissed again, its voice a low, guttural rasp that rattled his bones. "You are a fool, Elias," it crooned, its words thick with contempt. "You think your resolve, your strength will be enough to stop me? I have waited eons for this. The forest, the land, everything will fall to me." Elias stood his ground, breathing deeply, feeling the connection to the land beneath him. There was more to the forest than its trees, its streams, its animals. The forest was an entity, an ancient being that lived and breathed through the very pulse of the earth. The darkness before him might seek to devour it, but it could not own the land. Not while he was the keeper. With a sudden movement, the shadow lunged forward, its claws reaching for Elias, but he was ready. He sidestepped, twisting just out of its grasp. The shadow's claws raked the air with a shriek, but it couldn't catch him. Elias's speed was nothing compared to the weight of its malice, but his mind was clear, and his connection to the forest was his greatest strength. The whispers in the air grew frantic, their urgency becoming deafening. He could feel the land, the heartbeat of the world, pulsing beneath his feet, its rhythm erratic as if the very essence of the earth was in pain. The forest was hurting. The roots of darkness were spreading through it, winding deep into the soil, feeding on the fear and suffering of all who had come before him. He needed to sever the root of this evil. But how? What was the true source of this darkness? It wasn't enough to fight the creature. The core of the forest's corruption had to be destroyed. The shadow seemed to sense his thoughts. "You think you can stop me by cutting down a few trees?" It mocked, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. "This is not about trees or animals. This is about control. I have control of the very fabric of this land. The roots go deeper than you could ever imagine. And when I rise, there will be nothing left for you to protect." The more the shadow spoke, the more Elias understood. The creature was not just a manifestation of evil. It was the manifestation of something far older, far more dangerous. It was the corruption of the land itself, a festering wound that had festered for centuries. The roots of this darkness didn't just threaten the trees. They threatened the soul of the world. Elias's grip on his dagger tightened. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting to restore balance. To protect the forest, the land, the very world from which everything drew its life. He wasn't just the keeper of the forest. He was a guardian of the balance between life and death, between light and shadow. The shadow seemed to sense his resolve. Its eyes flared with rage, its mouth opening to unleash a roar so deep it rattled the very stones of the lodge. "You cannot stop me," it hissed, its voice now a twisted mockery of all that was pure. "You are nothing but a flicker in the endless night. The roots of darkness run deeper than you could ever comprehend. You cannot sever them. You cannot defeat me." Elias's pulse quickened, but his resolve remained unwavering. The shadow had already shown him its power, its hunger, but Elias had something it didn't: the forest. He could feel it now, the deep, pulsing energy of the land beneath him. The forest had spoken to him before, and now it was calling him. It was urging him to fight, not with his dagger but with the force of his bond. With a shout, Elias plunged the dagger into the ground before him, feeling the cold earth beneath his hands. For a moment nothing happened. The shadow laughed, its voice mocking. "Pathetic. You think the land will help you? The roots are already beyond your reach." But then something changed. A low hum began to reverberate through the earth, and the air around Elias shifted. The ground beneath him trembled, not in fear but in response. The forest moved. The trees creaked and groaned as the earth stirred, their roots shifting, their trunks bending in ways that defied logic. The mist around him cleared, and the temperature seemed to rise. A surge of energy coursed through his veins, and Elias felt the very pulse of the forest beneath him, ancient and powerful. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering and distorting. "No, this cannot be. You are just a man." Elias clenched his fists, feeling the energy flow through him like a river, powerful and unstoppable. His connection to the land was alive, and it was awakening. The shadow's grip on the forest was slipping. The roots of darkness that had spread so deeply beneath the earth were beginning to unravel, to wither. The trees, the land, the very heartbeat of the world were fighting back. Elias raised his hand, and the forest answered. The roots of the trees began to shift, winding toward the shadow, pulling the darkness from the earth, dragging it back down into the depths from where it had come. The shadow screeched in pain, its form writhing and dissolving as it was pulled deeper into the earth. "No!" the shadow cried, its voice filled with desperation. You cannot take me back. The darkness will return. It will rise again. You cannot stop it, Keeper." But Elias stood tall, his voice steady as he spoke the words that sealed the creature's fate. "You are the darkness of the past, and the past has no place here anymore." The earth trembled beneath him, the pulse of the land echoing through his body as the shadow screamed, its form disintegrating into the very soil. The roots of the darkness recoiled, shuddering and writhing as they were severed, one by one. The forest itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the malevolent presence was sucked back into the earth, its power fading like smoke in the wind. When the last of the shadow was gone, Elias stood alone in the silence. The mist had cleared, and the lodge had fallen silent, its oppressive presence fading. The trees around him swayed gently, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the forest felt alive again. The battle was over. For now. But Elias knew this was just the beginning. The darkness had been banished, but its roots had not been entirely severed. The forest was healing, but the scars of the past would remain, and the balance would need to be guarded. He looked down at his dagger, still lodged in the earth, and then up at the vast expanse of the forest around him. He had been tested and he had passed, but there was more to be done. The forest was still alive, and as long as he stood, the Keeper would continue to protect it. Elias stood in the stillness of the forest, his breath steady but his mind a whirlwind. The shadow, the darkness that had threatened to consume everything was gone, for now. The forest had responded to his call, the ancient energy of the land surging to his side. He had severed the roots of that malevolent force, but Elias knew that the battle had not truly been won. The shadow was merely one manifestation of something deeper, something far more ancient that had been buried beneath the earth for eons. It was only a matter of time before the darkness returned. But for now, the forest was at peace. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering in soft murmurs. The air, once heavy with the weight of corruption, was clear again, the fog lifting as if the forest itself was exhaling after a long-held breath. Elias took a deep, calming breath, letting the fresh, clean air fill his lungs. The lodge behind him stood silent, its broken structure now nothing more than a hollow shell, a remnant of a time long past. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of sorrow for it. The darkness had corrupted not just the land but the very memories of this place. The lodge had once been a place of life, of warmth. Now it was just a monument to what had been lost. But Elias knew that nothing stayed lost forever in the forest. The land was eternal, always regenerating, always shifting. It would heal in its own time. He turned away from the lodge and began to walk deeper into the forest, his steps slow but purposeful. The forest still held its secrets, its mysteries. The heart of the forest had warned him that the roots of darkness were deep, that the forest's balance was fragile. He hadn't severed the roots of evil, not completely. What he had done was only the first step. The darkness would rise again, and he would need to be ready. As Elias walked, he could feel the land beneath his feet, its pulse steady and rhythmic. It was almost as if the forest was talking to him, communicating with him in ways he couldn't entirely understand. There was a deep, ancient wisdom embedded in the very soil, a knowledge that only the keepers could access. The forest was alive with stories, with memories. Every rustling leaf, every shifting branch held a piece of the world's history, a history that Elias was just beginning to unravel. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A flicker of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. Elias stopped in his tracks, his senses sharpening instantly. He wasn't alone. The forest was never truly alone, but this presence was different. Felt raw. like a shadow that didn't belong. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his dagger. The wind shifted around him, cold and biting, carrying the faintest scent of decay. He could feel the weight of the forest around him, the ancient power of the land growing tense. It was as if the trees themselves were watching, waiting for something to unfold. The shadow moved again, closer this time, but Elias didn't need to see it to know what it was. He could feel it, a dark, twisting presence in the very fabric of the land. It was like the air itself had become thicker, more oppressive, as if the shadow was infecting everything it touched. The forest spoke to him then, its voice low and trembling, full of urgency. Elias, it is not over. The roots run deep, deeper than even you understand. What you severed was only a fragment. The darkness, it is not a single entity. It is a part of the land itself, a part of what once was. The voice faltered as if the trees themselves were uncertain of what was to come. But Elias understood. The forest wasn't just telling him a story, it was warning him. What he had faced so far was only the beginning. The darkness had not been eradicated, it had merely retreated. And now it was coming back. The shadow moved once more, and this time Elias didn't wait. He darted forward, his steps silent as he followed the presence, his senses heightened by the ancient power coursing through him. He was no longer just a man walking through the woods. He was the keeper, the guardian of this land, and nothing would harm it while he still stood. Through the trees he saw it, something moving through the underbrush, low to the ground, its form barely perceptible in the dimming light. It was a creature, but not one like anything Elias had ever seen. Its body was long and sinuous, covered in scales that shimmered with an oily, unnatural sheen. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow light that pierced the shadows around it. It was a thing of darkness, one of the roots. Elias's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just some creature of the forest. It was an embodiment of the very evil he had been warned about. It had come to test him again, to gauge how far he had come. But Elias was ready. He reached for his dagger and gripped the blade with both hands, his stance firm. The creature saw him now, its eyes locking onto his with a chilling hunger. It hissed, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Elias's neck stand up, and then it lunged, fast and vicious, moving with a speed that defied its grotesque form. Elias met it head-on, dodging its sharp claws with a swift roll to the side. The creature's body whipped around with a snarl, its tail lashing out like a whip, aiming to strike him down. He barely managed to duck in time, feeling the rush of air as its tail missed him by mere inches. The battle was nothing like the one he had faced before. This creature wasn't just a dark force, it was a physical manifestation of the evil that was spreading beneath the land. And Elias could feel it, this was no mere test. This was a fight for the forest's survival. He surged forward, slashing at the creature's side, the blade biting into its scales. The creature shrieked in pain, but it didn't falter. It lashed out again, claws swiping toward Elias's chest. He twisted out of the way, his foot slipping slightly on the wet ground, but he managed to avoid the strike. The battle raged on, each strike of the creature's claws sending vibrations through the earth beneath him. Elias could feel the land itself reacting, the trees swaying violently as though the very fabric of the forest was being torn at the seams. This was not just a battle between man and beast. It was a battle for the soul of the world itself. He couldn't keep dodging forever. He had to end this, now. With a battle cry, Elias leapt forward, bringing his dagger down in a wide arc toward the creature's exposed flank. The blade found its mark, sinking deep into the creature's flesh. The shadow creature howled, its form flickering and distorting as if it were being torn apart from the inside. The darkness around it seemed to unravel, but Elias could feel it. Its grip on the land was still there, still pulsing beneath the surface. As the creature crumbled to the ground, its body dissolving into smoke and shadows, Elias stood tall, panting from exertion. But the whispers of the forest were louder now, more frantic. This is only one of the roots. It will return. You must go deeper. Find the heart of the darkness before it finds you. Elias's heart sank. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He could feel the weight of the land's need pressing down on him once more. The forest was calling him. And this time, it was calling him into the heart of the abyss. The battle had left Elias battered, his body aching from the sharp claws of the dark creature, his chest heaving with each breath. The forest was eerily silent now, the remnants of the battle fading into the shadows. The creature's body, once a mass of writhing darkness, had evaporated into nothingness, but its presence still lingered, like a stain on the land itself. Elias stood alone in the quiet aftermath, the cold air thick with tension. He could feel it, the weight of something darker pressing in around him, tightening like a noose. The land beneath his feet, once alive with the pulsing heartbeat of the earth, now felt hollow. The roots of darkness, though severed for the moment, still stretched far beneath the surface, their tendrils twisting through the soil, seeking to corrupt and consume all that was pure. And the forest, as always, was speaking. "It's not over, Elias. The heart of the darkness calls to you." The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, weaving through the rustling leaves and the creaking branches. The voice of the forest had grown faint, but there was no mistaking the urgency in its tone. "The roots that you fought are merely tendrils of something much older, much deeper. You must go deeper still, to the heart of the abyss, where the darkness waits, patient and hungry." Elias's gaze hardened. He knew the path ahead would be perilous. The forest had warned him that the true source of the evil, the thing that had been festering in the shadows for centuries, lay buried deep beneath the land. What he had faced so far were only fragments, echoes of a deeper force, a force tied to the very soul of the forest itself. He had fought before and he would fight again. But this time the stakes were higher. This time he was not just defending the forest, he was defending the very heart of the land, its life and its future. The trees around him seemed to shift, their trunks groaning in protest. The air had grown thick, heavy with the presence of something ancient. Elias knew that this was no longer just about protecting the forest, it was about understanding it. The forest was a living entity, a vast, interconnected web of life, death, and rebirth. The darkness that had begun to spread through it was not an external force, but something that had always been a part of it, waiting for the right moment to rise. And now that moment had arrived. With a deep breath, Elias stepped forward, his boots crunching against the underbrush, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his dagger. The path before him was unclear, the mist growing thicker, wrapping around his legs like cold fingers. Every step felt as though he was descending deeper into the very heart of the forest's mystery, into the very place where the roots of darkness had begun. The forest, in its ever-shifting way, seemed to guide him, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Follow the path, keeper. Follow the path where the trees have forgotten the sun. There you will find what you seek." The trees around him grew taller, their trunks thick and twisted, their branches reaching out like the fingers of some long-forgotten giant. The further he went, the darker it became. The light from the moon was swallowed by the dense canopy, leaving him in near total darkness. The only sounds were the rustle of the leaves and the occasional distant call of a creature he couldn't see. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shifted. Elias's foot sank deeper than it should have, and with a sharp intake of breath, he stumbled. He caught himself on a nearby tree, his heart racing, and looked down. The soil was different here, black and oily, slick with a strange, otherworldly sheen. It didn't feel like earth, more like the remnants of something long dead, something that had once been alive but had been consumed by the very darkness he was chasing. The forest itself seemed to groan, as though the land was in pain, and for a moment, Elias felt a deep, gnawing sensation in his chest, an unsettling awareness that something ancient was waking. He knelt down, touching the soil with his hand. The ground pulsed, vibrating under his fingertips. It was alive with energy, corrupted, twisted, but alive nonetheless. "The heart is close," the forest whispered. "Deeper still. The roots stretch down to the very core of the world. You must sever them, Elias. The heart of the abyss is near." Elias's breath caught in his throat. He knew now that he wasn't just walking through the forest. He was entering it, entering the very core of the darkness. This place, this forgotten hollow of the forest, was the epicenter. It was where the land's corruption began, and if he could not find a way to sever the heart of this evil, then everything, the entire forest, the land, the world, would be doomed. His heart pounded as he stood, wiping the dirt from his hands. He was the keeper, and the weight of that title had never felt more oppressive. The forest needed him. But how could one man stop a force as ancient as the roots of darkness? He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and pressed forward. The air grew colder the further he went, the mist swirling around him like the grip of some unseen hand. The path ahead seemed to narrow, the trees growing closer together until their branches intertwined, blocking out the sky entirely. It was as if he was walking through the throat of some great beast, the walls of the forest closing in around him. And then, just as he thought he could go no further, he saw it. A clearing. At first, it seemed empty, just a dark pit in the heart of the forest, a place where nothing had grown. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw the roots. They were vast, twisting and writhing like serpents, stretching out from the ground and burrowing deep into the earth. The roots pulsed with an eerie, sickly light, their tendrils glowing faintly as though they were alive with some dark energy. This was the heart of the darkness, the source of everything that had been corrupting the land. The roots seemed to beckon to him, pulling at his very soul, urging him closer. Elias could feel the pull, the pressure of the darkness trying to infiltrate his mind, to cloud his thoughts. But he fought it, he had to. This was what he had come for. This was the source of the evil, and if he didn't act now, the forest would be lost forever. He stepped into the clearing, his dagger raised, ready to strike. But as he moved, the ground beneath him trembled, and a low, guttural voice echoed through the air. "You are too late, Keeper," it whispered, a voice full of ancient malice. "The roots are already in motion. You cannot stop what has already begun. The darkness will spread. You are nothing but a fleeting spark in the eternal night." The voice was not just one voice. It was a chorus, 100 voices, 1,000 voices, all speaking in unison, their words tangled together like vines. The roots of darkness pulsed with power, and Elias could feel the earth around him shaking, the very fabric of the world threatening to tear apart. But Elias stood tall. His grip tightened on his dagger, and with a cry of defiance, he plunged it into the roots. Elias's dagger sank deep into the roiling mass of roots, its cold steel striking against the hard, pulsing fibers of the darkness. The moment the blade made contact, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The ground beneath him trembled violently, as though the earth itself was protesting this intrusion into its depths. A low, grinding sound echoed through the clearing, like the bones of the world being twisted and broken. The roots beneath his feet writhed in response, their twisted shapes contorting as if alive with rage. Elias could feel the malevolent force pressing in on him, trying to break through the protective shield of his mind, to seep into his thoughts and bend his will. He gritted his teeth and focused, calling on the power that flowed through him, the deep, ancient connection between him and the forest. He was not just the keeper of the trees, of the creatures, of the land. He was the keeper of balance, and that balance was in danger of collapsing. The voice, 1,000 voices, whispered to him in unison, their words like poison crawling into his ears. "You cannot stop this, Elias. The roots are already intertwined with the very soul of this land. You are too small, too weak to undo what has been done. The darkness will consume you all." The darkness in the roots seemed to pulse and breathe, a living thing that fed on the very life force of the world. Elias could feel it now, the hunger of the abyss, reaching out, clawing at his very soul. The pull was so strong, so seductive, that for a moment he felt himself falter. The darkness whispered promises of power, of knowledge beyond comprehension, of an endless reign over the forest. But then, the memory of the forest, the creatures, the trees, and the countless lives that depended on him, surged within him like a flood. Elias clenched his jaw and gripped his dagger tighter, pushing deeper into the roots, channeling every ounce of his will into the blade. The connection between him and the land was alive, and the power of the forest flowed through him like a torrent, washing away the darkness that sought to claim his mind. With a roar, Elias pulled the dagger free and swung it again, this time with all his strength. The blade cut through the roots, severing one of the thickest tendrils with a crack that echoed through the forest like the sound of thunder. The roots recoiled, shrieking in fury, but Elias didn't stop. He continued to hack, each strike stronger, more forceful, as though the very energy of the earth was lending him its power. As the roots around him began to unravel, the ground shook violently, the sky above darkening as the force of the forest's energy collided with the malevolent force trying to corrupt it. The clearing was alive with the sounds of battle, roots snapping, the earth groaning, the wind howling. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around him, the lines between the world of the living and the world of shadows blurring. Elias pushed forward, slashing through the roots, his heart pounding with the rhythm of the land itself. The voice, the 1,000 voices, screamed in anguish, their whispers growing frantic, desperate. "You are nothing. You cannot defeat me. I am the heart of the forest's darkness. I am the corruption that runs deeper than the roots themselves." The shadows around Elias seemed to bend, as if trying to form into some tangible shape, a manifestation of the evil that had once slumbered beneath the earth. But Elias didn't stop. The forest was with him. It had spoken to him, had given him the strength to carry on. This was his duty, his purpose, to protect the land from the darkness that sought to undo it. He reached deeper into the heart of the roots, his dagger cutting through the darkness with a power he didn't know he had. The roots shrieked, their once strong grip on the land beginning to falter, the darkness retreating, but not without one final, defiant scream. "You cannot kill me, Keeper. You cannot sever the heart of the abyss." With one last, powerful strike, Elias drove his dagger into the very heart of the roots. The ground shuddered beneath him, and a wave of force exploded outward, knocking him to the ground. The roots recoiled, their twisted forms writhing in agony. The darkness screamed, its voice a chorus of anguish as it was torn from the earth, dragged back into the abyss from which it had come. And then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. For a moment, Elias lay on the ground, breathless and trembling, his mind reeling from the immense power that had just coursed through him. The forest around him was silent. The air had cleared, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifted. The roots, the tendrils that had once spread so deeply into the soil, had withered and decayed, leaving only the hollow remnants of their twisted forms behind. Elias slowly pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the battle. The clearing was still, the air still heavy with the aftermath of the fight. But the forest was alive again. The trees were standing tall, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly. The mist that had once clung to the land was now dissipating, allowing the light of the moon to filter through the canopy above. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the forest felt whole. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the land wash over him. The battle was won. The roots of darkness had been severed, the heart of the abyss destroyed. The forest had been saved for now. But as the wind whispered through the trees, Elias knew that the forest's balance would always be fragile. The roots of darkness would never be truly gone. They would always lie in wait, buried deep beneath the earth, ready to rise again if the balance was disturbed. He had won this battle. But the war for the heart of the land would never truly end. He took a deep breath and turned away from the clearing, his heart steady, his mind focused. The forest still needed him. He was its keeper. And as long as the darkness threatened to rise, he would stand guard, ready to fight once more. The night had fallen deeply now, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Elias stood on the edge of the clearing, gazing at the remnants of the roots that had once twisted so powerfully beneath the soil. The battle was over, but the forest's silence hung heavy in the air, as though it was still absorbing the shockwaves of the darkness that had been unleashed and then driven back. His heart still pounded in his chest, the adrenaline of the battle lingering in his veins. The weight of the fight had left him feeling both exhausted and exhilarated, as though he had crossed the threshold into something deeper, something beyond even the role of keeper. He was now a part of the forest's eternal struggle, a protector not just of the trees and animals, but of the balance that kept life itself in motion. He had felt the land's pulse through him, seen the very essence of its life and death. But even in his triumph, a sense of unease clung to him. The darkness had been severed, but not destroyed. The roots of the abyss were still in the earth, dormant for now, their tendrils still reaching out, hungry for the next chance to return. The battle was a victory, yes, but it was only a temporary one. The war for the heart of the forest would never truly end. Elias knew that. But it wasn't just the roots of darkness that haunted his thoughts. There was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It was a presence in the forest, a feeling that had been growing stronger ever since his victory over the shadow. It was like an ancient weight, a constant pull on his consciousness, drawing him deeper into the land, into the very heart of the abyss he had just fought to banish. The wind, the trees, the land, they were all alive with whispers now, but they were no longer comforting. They were urgent, frantic. And then he heard it, a rustle in the shadows. Elias stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at his side. His eyes scanned the trees, every rustling branch, every flickering shadow. The forest had always been a place of mystery, but now it felt as though something else was watching him, something that wasn't part of the forest itself. A presence beyond even the reach of the darkness he had just fought. The whispers in the air became sharper, more distinct, their voices layered with an unmistakable urgency. Elias, Elias, you cannot leave. Not yet. The voice was faint, but it echoed deep within his mind, like the call of an ancient entity hidden in the shadows. Elias's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the forest speaking to him now, not the land he had protected. This was something different, something older, darker. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic. You have severed the roots, but not the heart. You have only awakened the Watcher. The Watcher. Elias's heart raced. He had heard stories in his youth, tales whispered by the elders around campfires, of an ancient being that lived beneath the land, a creature whose eyes saw through the fabric of the world. It was said to be a protector, a guardian of the balance, but it was also a force of great destruction. The Watcher was a creature of darkness and light, a being tied to the very heartbeat of the world, watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment when the balance was threatened beyond repair. And now Elias knew that the time had come. He had severed the roots but not the heart, and by doing so, had awakened the very thing that had been bound deep beneath the earth. A low growl rumbled through the air, the trees around him shuddering as though in response. It was a sound that came from deep within the earth, a sound that seemed to resonate with the bones of the world itself. The watcher was close. It had been awakened, and it was waiting. The whispers in the air grew more insistent. "It is coming, Elias. It has seen you. It has watched you, and it will come for you." Elias felt the ground beneath him tremble again, only this time, it wasn't the remnants of the roots that were shaking the earth. It was something else, something ancient, something that existed beneath the surface of the world, something far older than the forest itself. And then, from the darkness between the trees, he saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, like two molten pools of amber, staring at him from the shadows. The creature was massive, its body wrapped in darkness, its silhouette barely discernible against the trees. It moved with a predatory grace, its shape shifting in and out of the shadows like a wraith. The very air around it seemed to warp, the temperature dropping suddenly as it stepped into the clearing. The Watcher. Its presence was suffocating, filling the air with an oppressive energy that seemed to claw at Elias's chest. His heart pounded louder now, the weight of the creature's gaze pressing on him, heavy and suffocating. The forest around him felt like it was closing in, the trees swaying as if the very land itself was holding its breath. The creature's eyes gleamed, an otherworldly intelligence radiating from them. It stepped closer, its movements slow, deliberate. Elias's hand tightened around the hilt of his dagger, but the creature didn't seem to notice him. Its gaze never wavered, always locked onto him as if it were reading his very soul. "Keeper?" The Watcher spoke, its voice a deep, rumbling growl that reverberated through the very earth beneath Elias's feet. "You have awakened me, but you do not understand. The balance is not just something you protect. It is something you serve. And you are not the only keeper." The Watcher's eyes narrowed, the air around Elias growing colder still, the ground beneath him trembling with the weight of its words. He felt a chill run through his spine, the warning in the creature's voice settling into his bones. "The roots you severed were not the true source of the darkness," the Watcher continued, its voice like the rumble of a distant storm. "The true darkness is within you, within all who walk the earth. The balance is fragile, and the heart of the abyss lies in the souls of the ones who think they are its guardians." Elias's mind raced. The Watcher was right. The balance was more than just the land, it was the very fabric of life, death, and rebirth, woven into the souls of those who protected it. Elias had fought to protect the forest, but the truth was clearer now. The true battle was not against the roots of darkness or the twisted creatures that crawled from beneath the earth. It was against the very nature of existence itself, the ebb and flow of life, the constant cycle of creation and destruction. The Watcher's gaze never wavered, its amber eyes piercing through him, reading his every thought. "You will never truly sever the roots of darkness, Keeper," the Watcher said softly, almost regretfully, "because you are a part of them. You are the heart of the abyss as much as you are the guardian of the light." The creature's massive form seemed to loom larger, the very air thickening with its presence. Elias felt his legs grow weak, his mind struggling to comprehend the gravity of the creature's words. What was it saying? Was the Watcher telling him that the battle was lost before it had even begun? But Elias had one thing the Watcher didn't: hope. The forest had always been more than just a place. It was a home, a living, breathing thing that could never be completely consumed by darkness. It was always reborn. Always. With a fierce resolve, Elias took a step forward, raising his dagger, ready to face whatever came next. The Watcher may have been ancient, but Elias was the keeper. And the forest had its own will, a will that would never break. "I may not be able to sever everything," Elias said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him, "but I will never stop fighting for the balance." The Watcher's eyes seemed to flicker with something close to amusement, but then, it tilted its head as if considering Elias for the first time. "Very well," it said. "Then let us see how long you can hold the darkness at bay, Keeper." And with that, the creature faded into the shadows, disappearing into the night. Elias stood alone in the clearing, his breath shallow, his heart still racing. The Watcher had warned him, but it hadn't taken him. Not yet. The war was far from over. And this time it was not just against the darkness of the forest. It was against something deeper, something more ancient. Elias would have to face it, and he would have to face himself. The forest stood still around Elias, the silence oppressive. The air was thick with tension, as though the very trees were holding their breath, waiting for the next step in a story far older than any living being. The Watcher had disappeared, but its presence lingered, like the shadow of a storm that had yet to break, the tension building steadily beneath the surface of the world. Elias's heart still raced, his mind whirling with the enormity of what had just occurred. The Watcher's words echoed in his mind, reverberating like the deep, rumbling growl of distant thunder. The darkness was not just something external. It wasn't merely a force that had been buried beneath the earth, waiting to rise. No, the Watcher had told him the truth. The true darkness was within. It was in the very fabric of existence, in the souls of those who stood watch over the land. The Keeper was not just the guardian of the forest. He was an integral part of the balance itself. And that balance was fragile, so fragile that the slightest misstep could send the world spiraling into chaos. Elias's fingers tightened around the hilt of his dagger, his knuckles white. He had always thought of himself as the forest's protector, its unyielding guardian, but now he wondered how much of the darkness within him had already taken root. The Watcher had spoken of the abyss inside him. It had seen him, understood him in ways that even he could not. The darkness that had been severed from the land, the roots twisted and torn, had not been eradicated. It had only shifted, moved deeper, further beneath the surface. The Watcher had warned him that the true battle would not be one fought with blade or strength. It would be a battle within, a battle for his very soul. The thought unsettled him. He had always known that the balance between light and darkness was delicate, but now, standing in the heart of the forest with the weight of the Watcher's words hanging over him, Elias realized that the line between the two was not as clear as he had once believed. The forest began to shift around him. The once still trees creaked and groaned, their branches swaying like spectral figures in the wind. The mist, which had parted after the battle with the roots, began to roll back in, thick and suffocating, as though the forest itself was recoiling from the disturbance caused by his confrontation with the Watcher. Elias could feel the land shifting, the pulse of the earth beneath his feet growing erratic, like the heart of the forest was struggling to find its rhythm. The whispers returned, faint at first, like a low murmur carried on the wind. But then they grew louder, their voices intertwining until they became a cacophony, disjointed fragments of thoughts and feelings, echoes of the ancient beings that had once lived in the forest, voices long forgotten by time. Elias, Keeper of the Woods, do not fight it. The balance is not yours to command. The words seemed to weave together, becoming a single voice, one that was both familiar and alien at the same time. It was as though the forest itself was speaking to him, not as a place but as a living, breathing entity, its consciousness reaching out to him from the depths of the earth. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the voice grew stronger. You are part of the forest, Keeper. Your blood, your soul, it is woven into the very roots of the land. You are the line between the light and the dark, the watcher of all that grows and all that dies. But you are also the shadow. You are the keeper of the abyss as much as the protector of the dawn. Elias's legs felt weak, and for a moment, he was unsure if he would collapse under the weight of the truth that seemed to press down on him like a physical force. His mind reeled. He was both the protector and the destroyer, the light and the shadow. The Watcher has shown you the path forward, Keeper, the voice continued, its tone almost gentle, like a lullaby that lured him into the depths of a dream. You must not fear the darkness within you. You must embrace it, for it is the very force that keeps the world turning. The balance cannot exist without both. The forest around him seemed to pulse with life, the trees swaying in time with his breath, as if they were trying to communicate something he couldn't quite understand. The wind, too, seemed to whisper his name, its cool touch brushing his skin with an urgency that sent a shiver down his spine. But Elias could feel something else now. Beneath the weight of the whispers, beneath the pressure of the forest's voice, there was something darker, something deeper, that threatened to rise again. He could feel the roots of the abyss stretching, writhing beneath the earth, seeking to break free once more. The darkness had not been truly banished, it had only been delayed. And if Elias didn't find a way to sever it once and for all, the Watcher's warning would come to pass. The balance would tip, and the abyss would swallow everything in its path. Elias clenched his jaw, determination settling over him like a cloak. He had made a promise to the forest, to the land that had entrusted him with its protection. He would not allow it to fall. Not now. Not ever. The voice of the forest, the voice that had once been so gentle, now became sharper, more insistent. You have felt the darkness, Keeper. You have seen it. But the true path lies within you. You must confront the abyss in your own heart. Only then can you sever the roots once and for all. A sudden rush of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a chill that seemed to cut to the bone. The mist swirled around him, and in the midst of it, Elias saw something, a figure barely visible, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, its form shifting in and out of focus, like a mirage born of shadows and fog. Its eyes gleamed, a pair of bright amber orbs, and as they locked onto Elias, a wave of recognition passed through him. It was the Watcher. The creature had returned. "The abyss lies in you, Keeper," the Watcher spoke, its voice low and resonant, reverberating through the air like thunder. "You will never escape it. It is in your blood. It is in your bones. And it will consume you as it has consumed all who came before you." Elias's heart pounded in his chest. The Watcher's words felt like a curse, a prophecy that could not be avoided. But Elias refused to let fear control him. He had seen the darkness in the forest, and he had faced it down. He would face this too. He stepped forward, his dagger held firmly in his hand, his resolve solidifying. The forest, the Watcher, and the very land itself seemed to hold its breath as Elias spoke the words that had been on his mind since the battle with the roots. "I will never let the darkness win. I will sever it, for good." The Watcher's eyes flickered, but it didn't move. The air around Elias crackled with the energy of the forest, the very power of life and death flowing through him. His blood, his soul, they were bound to this land. And it was time to reclaim his place within it, not as the keeper of the forest alone, but as the protector of its balance, light and shadow alike. The battle for the forest, for the soul of the world, was far from over. But Elias would never stop fighting. Elias's heart was a drumbeat in his chest, his mind a torrent of thoughts and questions. The forest around him seemed to shift and breathe with him, its energy like a living thing, responding to the stirrings of his soul. The Watcher, with its amber eyes glowing in the dim, swirling mist, remained still. The creature was waiting. It had spoken of the abyss within him, the darkness that had been awakened. The Watcher had hinted at something more, something deeper. Elias wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew one thing for certain. The time to understand was now. He stepped closer, his boots pressing into the damp earth, each step deliberate and full of purpose. The air grew heavier, as if the forest itself was waiting with bated breath, anticipating the next move. The trees swayed, their boughs groaning like ancient guardians who had seen too much, their roots buried deep beneath the world, stretching down into places even the stars feared to shine. The Watcher didn't move, but its gaze was piercing, its amber eyes following every flicker of Elias's thoughts, every beat of his heart. The creature had spoken of the abyss. But what was the abyss? What did it want from him? A chill crept up Elias's spine as the realization hit him. The abyss wasn't just an external force. It wasn't just a creature lurking beneath the earth, waiting to rise. The abyss was inside him, deep within his own soul. It had always been there, a silent shadow that fed on his doubts, his fears, and his very existence. The darkness that the Watcher had warned him about was not some malevolent force he could fight off with a blade. It was a part of him, a shadow that had always existed in the recesses of his mind, only now it was growing stronger, clawing at the edges of his consciousness. The Watcher spoke again, its voice deep and resonant, like the rumbling of the earth itself. "You are not the first to come to me, Keeper. Many before you have walked the same path, only to fall into the abyss within their own hearts. They believed they could sever it, contain it, banish it from existence. But the abyss cannot be destroyed. It can only be understood. And once you understand it, it will be your greatest weapon." Elias's hands tightened around his dagger, but he did not move. The Watcher's words echoed in his mind like a warning, and yet they held an undeniable truth. The abyss could not be severed. It could not be banished or locked away. But could he live with it? Could he embrace the darkness within him and use it to protect the forest? To protect everyone? The forest groaned around him, the wind picking up in a sudden, violent gust. The trees shook, their branches snapping and creaking under the pressure. The ground trembled, and for a moment, Elias thought he felt the pulse of the world itself, an ancient heartbeat that reverberated through his entire being. The abyss was not just a force of evil. It was a part of the natural order, a balance between life and death, light and shadow. The forest had always known this, but Elias had been blind to it. In his fight to protect the forest, he had always seen darkness as an enemy, something to be fought and eradicated. But now, standing before the Watcher, he realized the truth. Darkness was not the enemy. It was the counterbalance, the force that made life possible. Without the darkness, there could be no light. Without death, there could be no life. "You have felt the darkness in your heart, Keeper," the Watcher said, its voice a low rumble. "But do you understand it? Do you know what it is? What it wants from you?" Elias closed his eyes, the weight of the watcher's gaze pressing down on him. The whispers of the forest, the faint murmurs of the trees, seemed to hum in time with the creature's voice. It was as if the entire world was waiting for his answer, holding its breath as it waited for him to make the choice that would define not only his own fate, but the fate of the entire forest. He had always believed that to protect the forest, to protect the balance, he had to fight the darkness, to drive it back and keep it at bay. But now, standing before the watcher, he could see the truth. The darkness was not something to be defeated. It was something to be understood. Elias took a deep breath, his hand still gripping the dagger, but now more in understanding than in fear. The dagger was not just a weapon, it was a symbol. It was the edge that divided light from shadow, the tool that could help him walk the razor's edge between both. "I do understand," Elias whispered, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "The darkness is a part of me, a part of all of us, but it doesn't control me. It's not my enemy. It's my responsibility." The watcher's amber eyes flickered, almost as if in surprise. The air around Elias seemed to shift, the weight of the forest's ancient energy folding into itself, drawing him into a deeper understanding. The very soil beneath him seemed to pulse with life, as if it was awakening to his words, his realization. The trees too swayed more gently now, as if listening, accepting. "You have spoken the truth, Keeper," the watcher said, its voice a low growl. "The abyss does not consume you. It is the part of you that keeps the balance. You must not fear it. Embrace it, and you will understand the power you hold." Elias's heart pounded with the weight of what had just been revealed to him. The abyss was not something to fear, not something to fight. It was something to embrace, something to understand. He had always believed that his purpose as the keeper was to protect the forest from the darkness, to keep the balance intact by keeping the evil at bay. But now he saw it clearly. The balance was not something to be preserved through conflict. It was something to be nurtured through understanding, through the acceptance of both light and dark. The watcher took a step forward, its form still shifting in and out of focus like a wraith. Its eyes gleamed brighter now, filled with an ancient, knowing wisdom. "You are ready, Keeper," it said, its voice soft, almost reassuring. "You have passed the test. The abyss is yours to command. But remember, Elias, balance is not always a gentle thing. The darkness will always be there, lurking beneath the surface. But as long as you understand it, it will never consume you. And with it, you will protect this land from all that seeks to destroy it." Elias took a step back, his mind still reeling, but now there was a quiet certainty in his heart. The abyss was not something to be vanquished. It was a force that would always exist, but it was his to command. He had to walk the line between light and shadow, between life and death, and it was through that delicate balance that he would protect the forest. The watcher's eyes softened, and it gave a nod, as if satisfied with Elias's understanding. "The forest is yours to protect, Keeper. Do not fear the abyss." With that, the creature vanished, its form dissipating into the shadows, leaving Elias alone once more in the clearing. But he was no longer the same. Elias knew now that the true power of the Keeper was not in fighting the darkness, but in accepting it, understanding it, and using it to preserve the balance of the land. The forest was alive with that knowledge, and with it, Elias knew he was ready for whatever came next. The clearing where Elias stood, once filled with the chaotic energy of battle and confusion, now seemed eerily calm. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of moss and earth, of life and decay, a reminder that the balance between light and dark was fragile, always in motion. As the watcher's presence faded, Elias was left alone, but he no longer felt the overwhelming weight of isolation he had once felt. He wasn't just a guardian anymore. He was the balance itself, tethered between the two forces, light and shadow. His mind swirled with the implications of what he had just learned. The watcher had shown him the way forward, but it had also left him with a profound responsibility. The darkness inside him, the abyss that had been so carefully contained, so deeply buried, wasn't something to be feared as he had thought for so long. It was a part of him, a necessary force that would help him protect the forest. It was his duty to learn to control it, to let it flow through him, but never let it consume him. His fingers still gripped the hilt of his dagger, its cold steel a reminder of the battle he had fought and the journey ahead. The blade felt like an extension of his will, a tool forged in the fire of the very balance he now protected. Elias turned, his gaze shifting over the forest around him. The trees, tall and ancient, seemed to watch him, their gnarled branches stretching out like the arms of forgotten giants. The sky above was covered in thick, dark clouds, and the air grew stiller by the moment. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next movement, the next shift in the endless cycle of life and death. But something was wrong. The stillness had an unnatural edge to it, a sense of wrongness that Elias couldn't quite place. The forest, despite its ancient life and wisdom, had an uneasy pulse now. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches twisting, and the ground beneath him felt different. He could sense the shift in the air, the quiet undercurrent of change. The forest itself had felt him change, his acceptance of the abyss, and it was reacting. What had once been a harmonious pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the earth, was now a jagged rhythm, irregular and sharp, like the throes of some vast, unseen creature. The whispers, too, had changed. No longer the calm, guiding murmur of the forest, they had turned sharper, more urgent. Elias could hear fragments of words, half-formed sentences, rising from the ground like the echoes of long-forgotten memories. The voices were familiar, but twisted, like voices he should have known but couldn't place. They seemed to call to him, beckoning him to follow. Keeper. Elias. The path ahead is not as it seems. You have embraced the abyss, but beware, some shadows are not yours to control. A shiver ran through him. The forest was changing, yes, but the darkness within him was also stirring, growing restless, stretching out like roots searching for an anchor. Had he truly understood it? Could he control it, or was it beginning to control him? Elias's gaze snapped to the ground as the earth beneath him seemed to shift. The once firm soil cracked open, splitting in jagged lines like the surface of a broken mirror. He stumbled backward, his hand reaching out to steady himself, but his legs were weak, his feet slipping in the loose dirt. The air turned colder, and the wind howled in a way that felt more like a warning than a natural breeze. The whispers grew louder, now indistinguishable from the wind, filling his ears with a cacophony of voices, each one calling his name, urging him to listen. Elias, you have broken the veil. The abyss within you is waking. The ground trembled beneath him, and from the newly opened fissure in the earth, a dark, pulsing light began to emerge. It was not like the shadows he had fought. This was something different. It was a light that seemed to consume all other light, a swirling, shifting mass of energy that bent reality itself, distorting the very air around it. It was the abyss, yes, but it was not the abyss Elias had come to know. This was something far darker, far more ancient, and it was rising. Elias took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. This was no simple corruption of the forest. This was something else entirely. Something that had been buried beneath the earth, beyond even the reach of the watcher, a presence that had slumbered for eons. His pulse quickened and his mind raced. Was this the true heart of the abyss? Had he awakened something beyond his control? The darkness he had embraced had been his own. It had always been a part of him. But now, this was something that had always been here, something older than the trees themselves, older than the forest itself. And it was hungry. The ground around him buckled again, the cracks widening as the pulsing light began to grow, filling the air with a suffocating energy. The trees trembled, their roots twisting and shifting beneath the surface. The very land seemed to be breaking apart, as if the earth was fighting to expel the darkness that was rising from within. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He had felt the darkness, he had learned to understand it, but this was different. This was a force that didn't belong to the balance. It was a force that existed to destroy the balance, to consume everything in its path. The darkness surged, its power reaching toward him with a force that made the air crackle and hum with malice. Elias could feel it, pulling at the edges of his mind, threatening to drown out his thoughts, to consume his very soul. He fought against it, pushing back with all his strength, but the abyss was stronger than he had realized. You cannot control me, Keeper, the voice of the abyss whispered, its tone hollow and ancient. I am the end of all things. I am the hunger that devours the stars. Elias's knees buckled beneath him, the weight of the presence pressing down on him like a physical force. He could feel the darkness wrapping around him, coiling through his veins like poison. His vision blurred, his senses spinning as the abyss tried to consume him. But he couldn't give in, not now. Not when the forest, the land, the balance was on the verge of collapse. With everything he had left, Elias drew upon the power of the forest. He reached into the roots, into the very heartbeat of the earth, calling upon the life force of the land to give him strength. He could feel it, the pulse of the trees, the flow of energy through the soil, the ancient rhythm that had sustained life for millennia. The darkness could not consume this. Not while he was here. You will not win, Elias growled, his voice shaking but firm. He reached down and plunged his dagger into the ground, the blade singing as it connected with the heart of the earth. The pulse of the land responded, the ground beneath him shaking as the energy surged through him, his body a conduit for the forest's power. The abyss screamed in fury, its tendrils pulling back, recoiling from the force that Elias had unleashed. The light that had risen began to fade, its power dimming as the forest fought back, the earth pushing against it with a strength that seemed to come from the very core of the world. But Elias knew this was only a temporary victory. The abyss was not gone, it was merely retreating, forced back into the depths from which it had come. For now. Elias stood, his body trembling, his heart racing. The forest had resisted the darkness, but the question remained, how long could the balance hold? The abyss was still there, still waiting, its hunger never fully satisfied. He would have to be ready, because the war was far from over. The night grew colder, darker still. Elias stood alone at the edge of the clearing, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His body ached, his mind reeling from the force of the abyss's power. The ground beneath him still trembled, the earth scarred from the battle that had unfolded in the very heart of the forest. The darkness had not retreated in defeat. It had merely paused, coiled back into itself, biding its time. And Elias knew this, he could feel it deep in his bones, that time would not be kind. The abyss had touched him, tasted his soul, and though it had been repelled for now, it would return. It always returned. His hand still gripped the hilt of his dagger, the blade stained with the residue of the battle, its edge still humming with the energy of the forest. He had drawn upon its power, and for a brief moment the abyss had recoiled. But he was not fool enough to believe that this was the end. The force that had risen from the cracks in the earth was something far older than the land itself. A hunger so deep, so primal, that even the trees and stones of the forest seemed to tremble at its mere presence. Elias had to understand what it was, what the abyss was. He had learned that it was not just a force of destruction. No, it was far more complex than that. It was a force of balance, yes, but a balance that was wrong. The Watcher had spoken of the abyss within him, and Elias had thought he understood it. But now, standing on the edge of the forest, surrounded by its ancient whispers and restless energy, he realized he had only begun to understand the true depth of its power. The abyss was not a single entity, not just a darkness that could be banished. It was a force that shaped the world. It existed not only within him, but within all things. The trees, the wind, the earth, the creatures that roamed the land. The Watcher had said that the abyss was a necessary part of the balance, that without it, there could be no light. But Elias didn't know if he could accept that truth anymore. The abyss was not simply a shadow, not just the counterpoint to the light. It was a corruption, a hollowing force that drained life, that twisted the very nature of existence. The land around him seemed to echo with this knowledge, the trees groaning in response to his thoughts. The air felt thick now, almost suffocating, as if the abyss were trying to creep back into the world, to reclaim what it had once lost. Elias felt the subtle, insistent tug at the edges of his mind, a whispering lure that promised power, that promised answers. His footsteps were heavy as he walked deeper into the forest, his every step seeming to send ripples through the land. The forest had grown eerily silent again, the usual symphony of animal life replaced by a profound stillness. It was as if the creatures themselves had fled, sensing the change in the air, the weight of the darkness that loomed over everything. In the distance, the outline of the old lodge appeared, its silhouette standing against the darkened sky, its once welcoming form now a haunted thing, twisted and corrupted by the presence of the abyss. Elias's instincts told him to turn away, but he knew better. The path that had been set before him was leading him there, to the heart of the corruption. He had to confront it. He had to face what lay hidden within the walls of the lodge, what had been buried there, forgotten by time, waiting for someone like him to uncover it. As he drew closer, the mist thickened, swirling around his legs, obscuring his vision. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, of something long dead yet unwilling to rest. The ground beneath his feet was soft, yielding to his weight as though the earth itself was sinking under the weight of the abyss's influence. Elias reached the door of the lodge and paused. The once sturdy wood was now warped and cracked, the carvings on its surface worn away by centuries of neglect. The door seemed to pulse with a strange energy, a faint hum that vibrated through the air, sending chills down Elias's spine. He raised a hand to push it open, but the moment his fingers made contact with the door, a jolt of power shot through him. His mind flared with visions, flashes of the past, images of a time long gone. He saw the forest, but it was not the same as it was now. The trees were different, older, their roots stretching deep into the earth, far beyond where they were now. The land was vibrant, full of life, but there was something dark at the edges of the vision. A shadow moving beneath the surface, hidden from sight, but ever-present. And then the vision shifted. He saw a figure, tall, cloaked in darkness, standing at the center of the forest, surrounded by twisted roots that reached into the sky like gnarled fingers. The figure raised its hands, and the roots began to pulse, to writhe as though alive. The air thickened with malevolent energy, and the shadow of the figure seemed to expand, swallowing everything in its path. The balance had been shattered. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Elias breathless, his heart pounding. He could feel the remnants of the vision, the lingering energy of the abyss that had tried to consume him. The figure, it was the Watcher. But it was not the Watcher he had met. This was something older, something more powerful, more destructive. The Watcher had never been a guardian. It had been a prisoner, imprisoned by the abyss it had once been a part of. Elias could feel the weight of the truth settling over him like a storm cloud. The Watcher had been bound, not by the land itself, but by its own darkness. The balance had never been whole. It had always been fractured. And Elias had unknowingly become a part of that fracture. A voice, deep and distant, reached his ears. It was a whisper, barely audible over the wind, but it carried with it a message that sent a tremor through his entire being. The heart of the abyss lies beneath your feet, Elias. It is not the forest you must save. It is yourself. He turned, the words reverberating in his mind, and saw the ground beneath the lodge begin to shift. The roots, once hidden beneath the earth, were stirring once again. The earth trembled as they pushed their way to the surface, breaking through the soil like veins feeding into the heart of the abyss. The truth was undeniable now. The balance could not be restored by simply protecting the land. The abyss was not something external, it was within him. And now he had to make a choice. Could he sever the roots of darkness, or would he allow them to grow? Could he embrace the abyss without allowing it to consume him? And if he failed, what would become of the land? The choice was his to make. With a final glance at the now ruined lodge, Elias stepped forward, his resolve hardening. He would confront the darkness. He would face the abyss and take back what it had stolen. The war for the soul of the forest had only just begun. The ground shifted beneath Elias's feet, the earth trembling with an unnatural pulse. The roots of the abyss, twisted and gnarled, seemed to writhe with life, crawling out from the depths, pushing against the earth as if desperate to break free. The air around him thickened with a stifling energy, and every breath he took tasted like ash, bitter and heavy. The forest, once full of life and rhythm, was now caught in the grip of something far older and far darker than it had ever known. Elias stood at the threshold of the lodge, his hand still resting on the warped door, his mind a whirl of conflicting thoughts. The words of the abyss still echoed in his mind, the voice that had warned him of the true danger, of the fracture within him. The Watcher had not been the protector he had believed. It had been a prison, a creature bound by the very force that now sought to consume the world. The Watcher had served as the keeper of a dark truth. The abyss was not an external force, it was a part of the forest, of the world, and of himself. His heart raced, and his hand tightened on the dagger at his side, the cold metal a sharp reminder of the weight of his choices. He had come so far, and yet the path ahead was still shrouded in darkness, as uncertain as the forest itself. Could he sever the roots of the abyss, or would he be consumed by them? Would he become a part of the balance he had sworn to protect, or would he fall to the darkness just like the Watcher before him? The ground beneath him shuddered again, and a deep, resonant sound seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was the voice of the abyss, its power thrumming in the soil, vibrating through the air like a dark symphony. The roots twisted, forming patterns in the earth, shifting and changing as though they were alive, reacting to his presence. And then the voice came again. Elias. It was not the whisper of the forest, nor the calm murmur of the trees. This was something deeper, more primal. The abyss is your heritage. It is your bloodline, your birthright. You have always known this. You have always been a part of it, as much as the forest itself. His heart skipped a beat. The abyss was in his blood? He had always thought of himself as the keeper, the protector, the one who kept the darkness at bay. But now, standing at the threshold of the lodge, he understood the truth. He was not separate from the abyss. He had never been. The darkness had always been inside him, lying dormant, waiting to awaken. The lodge creaked ominously behind him, as if it too was aware of the change. The walls groaned under the weight of centuries of secrets, and the door in front of him beckoned, its shadow stretching long and dark across the ground. Elias took a step forward, his hand reaching for the handle. He had to go in. He had to confront whatever lay inside. The abyss had already begun to seep into the world, and if he did not face it now, it would destroy everything he had fought to protect. With a deep breath, Elias pushed open the door, the old wood groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The air within the lodge was thick with dust, heavy with the scent of decay. The walls were lined with old wooden beams, their surfaces warped by age and neglect. The fireplace was cold, the hearth abandoned, but it still felt alive with the remnants of a long-forgotten warmth. The darkness inside the lodge was oppressive, wrapping around him like a cloak, the shadows pressing in from all sides, as though the very space itself was filled with the whispers of the abyss. Elias moved deeper into the lodge, his every step cautious, his senses heightened. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the air became. It felt as though the shadows themselves were watching him, pressing in from the corners of the room, their edges flickering and shifting in the dim light. The walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched the beating of his own heart, a slow, steady thrum that made him feel as though the very structure of the lodge was alive, breathing in sync with his every movement. The whispers grew louder now, swirling around him like the voices of 1,000 souls trapped in the darkness. Elias, you cannot escape your nature. The abyss is your reflection, your shadow. He forced himself to move forward, pushing through the oppressive atmosphere, until he reached the farthest room of the lodge. It was there, in the deepest corner, where the darkness was thickest, that he felt it, the pulse of the abyss thrumming beneath the floorboards like the beating of a heart. His hand trembled as he reached for the old wooden panel beneath his feet. The darkness called to him, its pull growing stronger, urging him to open the door to face what lay beneath. His fingers brushed against the cold wood, and he could feel it, a presence ancient and hungry waiting just beyond the door. He could feel the power of the abyss rising, coiling, ready to strike. The lodge had been built on this power, woven into the very foundation of the earth, and it was here that the heart of the abyss had been hidden, buried for generations. With a final breath, Elias pushed open the door. The room beyond was vast, but there was no light. It was a cavernous space, the walls and ceiling lost in the darkness, but Elias could feel the energy pulsing beneath the floor, vibrating through the air, sending shivers down his spine. In the center of the room was a stone altar, worn by time, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the shadows. The air was thick with a suffocating energy, and the ground beneath him seemed to pulse with a deep, rhythmic beat. And there, lying on the altar, was the heart of the abyss. It was not a physical object, but an essence, a mass of swirling darkness, a living shadow that seemed to writhe and churn in the air itself. It was the source of the corruption, the thing that had been buried and hidden for centuries. Elias could feel its power, its hunger pressing against him, pulling at him, trying to drag him into its depths. It was ancient beyond understanding, and it had been waiting for him. The darkness spoke again, its voice a low, guttural hum that seemed to resonate in his very bones. You cannot escape me, Elias. I am your legacy. I am the root of your being. The abyss, the heart of the corruption, was speaking directly to him, reaching into his soul, calling him by his name. Elias could feel it inside him, the pull of the darkness, the reflection of his own fears and desires. It was the same thing that had lived inside him all this time, the shadow that had shaped his actions, his choices, his very identity. But now, standing in front of the heart of the abyss, Elias realized the truth. The darkness wasn't just a force he had to fight. It was a force that needed to be understood, a force that was part of him. And only by facing it, by accepting it, could he truly protect the forest and the balance that he had sworn to keep. Elias raised his hand, reaching out toward the swirling darkness, his heart steady. It was time to confront the abyss within him, to sever its hold, and to bring balance not by rejecting the darkness, but by embracing it. With a single, deliberate breath, Elias stepped forward, and the world around him dissolved into shadows.